Welcome to The Big Picture, a show that takes a deep dive into the political landscape of not only America, but right here in our own backyard of Illinois.
It's showtime, folks.
The Big Picture is on WCPT 820. And now, here's your host, Edwin Eisendrath.
Well, hello, everybody. It's another lovely day here in Chicago. I live in a neighborhood that's got a garden walk, and people are out and enjoying it. But I want to talk to you about things that aren't so fun. What a week. But to talk about it, I need to tell you some background, a story. In the 1980s, I lived near Wrigley Field in Chicago. I lived in one of the city's courtyard buildings, but for people who don't live here, it's the one that got featured in the movie While You Were Sleeping, that kind of building. The building had 4 entryways around a courtyard. Each led to a stairway that went up 4 flights, and there were 2 apartments per floor. And the units were, they were nice, and rent was about $350 a month. We all knew each other, at least by sight. During that time, the neighborhood also became Boys Town, Chicago's first recognized gay neighborhood. And during that time, AIDS arrived. And my neighbors grew sick, and several died. And I started to go out with an organization called Open Hand to deliver meals to the sick and to the dying. The stairwells began to smell of death. Today, it is impossible for people to imagine how frightening and lonely that time was. COVID was something the nation shared. AIDS struck a minority population, and our government turned its back. Led by Senator Jesse Helms, the United States Senate, by a vote of 94-2, voted to ban the CDC from spending any money, quote, that promote or encourage directly or indirectly homosexual activities. And that meant the government couldn't talk about how condoms help prevent the spread of the disease. The House voted 358-47 in favor of that bill, and President Reagan signed it. Senator Helms blamed AIDS on a homosexual lifestyle, and Reverend Jerry Falwell, who was a leader of the Republican movement in America, the right-wing preacher, the founder of Liberty University, he proclaimed that AIDS is not just God's punishment for homosexuals, it's God's punishment for a society that tolerates homosexuals. That tolerates? When a man entered the hospital, his partner had no legal right to be there with him. When he died, his partner had no right to attend the funeral. And there was so much death. From 1981 to 1992, AIDS cases rose from just 318 to more than 75,000 a year. Death rates grew to more than 50,000 a year. Good people, gay and straight, never stopped fighting for the dignity of every human being. America, and particularly gay Americans, paid a terrible price. Far too late, we triumphed over the hatred. Congress finally did step up. Scientists did their work. So did public health workers, and we overcame AIDS. And we overcame closed minds. In time, gay marriage became a fact. Grieving partners no longer can be shunted aside. It's too painful to think about the lives we might have saved if we'd acted earlier. It's even harder to imagining the suffering we could have eased if we had just acted more humanely. Americans came through this crisis, again, with terrible cost, but we came through and we built a stronger country. We overcame powerful animus wrapped in a bigoted version of Christianity because enough of us would never let hate be stronger than love. And before he died, Jesse Helms, the senator who led the bill, led the nonsense, he recanted and he said he was wrong about AIDS. And yet, here we are once again, once more, politicians and preachers have ditched the gospel of love in favor of fear and hate. This week we learned more about that terrible tragedy in Texas. We learned that the Biden administration, through the Recovery Act, sent money to Kerr County, where the flood occurred, to meet their need for building storm drainage, for public safety facilities, and a communication system to warn people in time to get out of the very places where last week people were not warned and they died. In November of 2021, the Kerr County commissioners met to consider spending those federal funds. And at the meeting, people rose to argue against taking the money. Why? One said, these people are communists. They hate America. They're teaching it in our schools, whatever that means. They're invading the border as we speak. I don't think we should take any money from the federal government because they can't be trusted. Another said, we don't need these funds. We'll get by without them. But if we take the money, you'll be signing a contract with the devil. And the Kerr County commissioners opted not to use the money. This week, we learned the Homeland Security, which houses FEMA, couldn't respond to the disaster in a timely way. Why? Budget cuts, new red tape. On July 5th, the day after the flood crested, and at the most important moment in the rescue efforts, Secretary Kristi Noem slashed funding for FEMA disaster assistance, their disaster assistance line. Response rates to calls for emergency assistance immediately dropped from 99.7% to 35.8%. July 5th. Noem once told reporters, as a result of the values I hold according to biblical principles, they impact my decisions. We are called to love, but we are also instructed to stand for the truth. And this week, she visited the disaster site and said, I'm extremely grateful for God's hand in that whole situation because hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people were saved. Hundreds are dead. Children watch their campmates get washed away. Parents are left to grieve. And those Americans who testified against taking the money that might have prevented all this, their shame is forever etched. It lives on in testimony that anyone can see on YouTube. Look, this is not, as Jerry Falwell might have said, a God-sent flood to punish those people for their sins. It is a man-made problem, man-made climate change, man-made ignorance, man-made hate that led to this loss of life. It's Americans who've been fed for years on propaganda of lies and conspiracies, so much so they no longer want to share a country with the rest of us. Won't even reach out, take our hand when we offer to help. Meanwhile, Kristi Noem also runs ICE, and at least 12 people have died in ICE custody this year. Deaths includes a Canadian citizen. This week, the first fatality we saw during an ICE raid itself. And look, while emergency assistance goes unfunded, ICE's budget is tripled, and in all $170 billion is going to go to build a system of internal, let's call them what they are, concentration camps and the forced removal of millions of residents. Many more will die. This week, the Trump administration, they're in court trying to gain the power to detain anyone they want without due process. Without due process. If they manage to succeed, then anyone can be picked up and sent away. You know, they say they're ridding the streets of rapists and murderers. Instead, they're taking gardeners and strawberry pickers, Walmart greeters, and, who knows who else. Maybe no one will know. Maybe they'll just disappear like those campers in Texas. We can heal from this. We can help the hateful overcome their hate. We did it before, but a terrible price was paid. A terrible price is paid in our history every time we have to do this. How many dead? How many disappear? That depends on how quickly we wrestle control of government from these so-called faithful. Maybe then when they're out of power, like Senator Helms, they're going to repent. That's between them and God. Meanwhile, we can't wait. Let's get to work. I have a fabulous show lined up for you today. Really fabulous, in fact, and I'm so excited about our first guest, and we will get to her in just a moment after a quick break.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Okay, everybody, I promised you fabulous before that break, and here's fabulous. Alison LaCroix is a professor at the University of Chicago Law School. She's also a member of the university's history department. Her books focus on the evolving nature of federalism, how the Constitution and those who interpret it handle the balance of power between Washington and the states. Kind of important right now, so I'm delighted to have her. Hello, Alison.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, you got to help us. And we are not trained lawyers. So, we play them on TV, but we're really not, we don't know what we don't know. So you got to help us here. This notion of distributed power, I think, goes back further than the Constitution in our country. But it seems now under attack by a renewed, let's say, monarchical movement. The idea of states' rights has been embraced by the right and the left in different times, mostly the right, though, I think. But I think we still don't understand it. Can you give us a primer?
Absolutely. Well, you're certainly right that we now call it federalism, but a better, I think, more kind of intuitive layperson, honestly, way to think of it is what you called it, distributed power. So just this idea that the American system has multiple levels of government, and that's the national government, but then also the states. And then there's also, of course, municipalities, localities, cities, towns, et cetera. And that goes way, way back to before the Constitution, indeed, in some ways to the British Empire and the colonial period. But basically, what we have now in 2025 through the text of the Constitution, actual practice and lived governance, and cases coming from the Supreme Court says, yes, in fact, states are real. They have a domain that they can operate in and are supposed to operate in, and that domain doesn't totally overlap with the national government. And there are things that the national government can do. There are things the states can do, and that's not an overlapping set of things. So states aren't just the agents of Washington, D.C. And we know this in lots of ways. We see it all the time. And we can think of, under the Biden administration when we had Texas and the governor of Texas saying there's an invasion at the southern border and putting up fences and all sorts of things. And then we can think of it today with lots of different states saying we are going to protect migrants and protect other sort of populations and rights. So, it's on both and all sides of the political spectrum and always has been. But I think today, it's a surprise to many people to see blue states, I'll say, claiming states' rights, because our past 100 or so years of experience has been that it was the right, it was conservatives, it's segregationist states saying, to the federal government, no, you can't desegregate the schools. But in fact, states' rights arguments go all the way back and have always been found on all sides of the political spectrum.
Yeah, in this part of the country, I think Wisconsin led a states' rights fights against the Fugitive Slave Act. So, I guess we've been on all sides.
Yes, and that's one of my, I think, the most interesting examples. It's something I talk about in my most recent book, because this was in the 1850s, so it's right before the Civil War, but it isn't the Civil War. And Congress and the presidents, at that point, President Buchanan and President Fillmore and others, so we're not yet to Abraham Lincoln, say, the federal government has to be completely behind support for slavery. And so there's statutes, there's Supreme Court case law, there's this act of Congress, the Fugitive Slave Act. And in a number of states, including Wisconsin, people nullify this, essentially. The state legislature says this is invalid. Congress doesn't have this kind of power. The president doesn't have this kind of power. You have a mob in Milwaukee that breaks out of jail, an alleged fugitive, this formerly enslaved black man, Joshua Glover, and the courts of the state of Wisconsin give relief to people. So it's interesting because it's an example that I talk about in the book, and I find, for most people, it's totally surprising to hear, wait, on the eve of the Civil War, some of the people arguing for states' rights were actually the good guys, the people who thought there should be emancipation and there should be freedom. And the bad guys are the people in Washington, D.C. They're compromising. They're doing all these things. But, yeah, they passed this law that basically nationalizes slavery. So that's the 1850s, but it feels very current to us.
Doesn't it? Wow, so current. Help me understand how we can think about where the line is, right? I mean, the federal government surely can tell states that there are things they're not allowed to do. I'm thinking about they're not allowed to enter into treaties with other nations. They can't make handguns illegal. I think those are constitutional bans. There may be statutory ones. But can it tell states things they must do? For example, can Washington tell a state it has to use its police to drop what they're doing and instead spend time supporting ICE raids? I guess I'm asking about the extent of the supremacy clause, and I don't know, what do you lawyers call the other thing? Preemption? I don't know.
Yeah, preemption. Well, I mean, there is actually a lot of law on this, and some of it is recent and feels like, understandable to us today, and some of it is, again, from before the Civil War, and that starts to get a little harder to translate. But basically, I mean, we know Congress passes laws all the time that say things like, if you're an employer, if you're a company, you have to pay people this amount, or you can't make people work more than these number of hours. You have to allow for certain collective bargainings, like wages and hours regulation, for instance. That goes way back to the 1920s, 30s. So that's true if the employer is a private company, right? If they're, a university or a business or whatever. It's also true that if they're a state, and this was something that in the 1970s and 80s, the Supreme Court took a bunch of cases about, because they were like, well, if the state is the employer, and Congress tells the state, you also are bound by these general wage and hours laws, or is it different because the state is a state and it's special in a government?
Oh, that's so interesting.
And basically where the court came out, and this is in the 1980s, was, look, when the state is doing things that aren't about being a government, it's not passing laws, it's not enforcing the laws, it's acting like an employer, it's acting like a database operator, all the things that we could think of. The state of Illinois does all these things. Then it can be regulated by Congress when it's doing those kind of non-state-like things. And Congress, though, say to the states, and these were other issues that came before the Supreme Court in the 1980s and 90s, okay, what if Congress says, hey, we're going to pass a federal gun background check law, the Brady Act, and while we're getting the whole background check system up and running, it would be great if we could just have county officials, state officials, local officials kind of run these background checks temporarily. And this was a case that went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided it in 1997, and the Supreme Court's like, oh, you can't do that. So because Congress, what you're doing there is commandeering, that's the word the court used, you're commandeering the state officials to get them to do your bidding. And you can't do that. So Congress can't take the state legislatures over and essentially, the way I think of it is, treat them like a ventriloquist dummy. Congress can't say, hey, Illinois legislature in Springfield, pass this law as an Illinois law. And they can't say to, the Cook County sheriff, enforce this law. If they want to do something like that, Congress has to set up, it has to use federal officers, which is ICE, which is the TSA at airports. And the court's rationale for this was, it's about accountability. It's about the citizens knowing who to blame if they want to blame people. But it's also about these principles of, again, state autonomy and federalism. So Congress cannot tell the Chicago police or the Cook County sheriff, you must go do this. And there's also case law, again, about the Fugitive Slave Act that says this, so it's old. But they can use federal officials, and then the state officers and state officials can't interfere. So there's this fine line between can Congress use them and can they interfere? They can't interfere, but they can't be used as tools.
Okay. But now the government has other tools in its arsenal, the federal government, than just saying to somebody, you must do this. They can say, if you don't do this, we're going to withhold all kinds of money. And can they do that? And when can they do that? When can't they do that?
Yes, right. And we see a lot of this today. So Congress obviously has the power to appropriate, and then they have what's called the spending power in constitutional law terms. So they can tax and they can spend the money that they've gathered through taxes. Now, a couple of things are interesting about this. First, as a matter, again, of constitutional law from the Constitution and from the courts, that's Congress's power. It's not the president's power. So there are cases that came up in the first Trump administration about this, when Trump in his first term said to quote unquote sanctuary cities, I'm going to take away your funding. And the court said, wait a minute, the spending power belongs to Congress, not the president. So Congress can do this. But then we know, and this is where the kind of politics get interesting, if we think back not that long ago, just over a decade, the Obamacare controversy case that went to the Supreme Court, the court said, hey, Congress can use this bargaining power of the spending power. It can give the states a deal. So, for instance, Congress in the 1980s said to the states, hey, states, raise your drinking age, your minimum age to purchase alcohol from 18 to 21. There are a couple of holdout states that say we don't want to do it. And Congress says, okay, if you don't do it, you're going to lose a percentage of your highway funding. So you decide, but this is the deal. And the court blessed that in the 1980s. Then Obamacare comes along, the Affordable Care Act. And in 2012, the court said, well, when Congress says to all the states, you must expand Medicare or else you'll lose all your Medicare funding, that's coercion. That's too much. That's not just bargaining. That's moved into the realm of, like, you're coercing the states. So we know that was in the context of limiting the Obamacare program. But again, it's Congress's power. They can offer the deal, but the conditions have to be clear. And it can't be what the court in the Health Care Act case called a gun to the head, withholding all federal funding under Medicaid, for instance.
Yeah. Did they set up a test so that we know the difference between bargaining and coercion?
They set out kind of
a standard. Or they just we'll know it when we see it?
I mean, it's something between withholding all federal funding under Medicaid, a huge portion of all state budgets, can't do that, and 5% of state highway funding, which is a much smaller percentage. And it all has to be kind of clear at the outset. But what's interesting is, all of that those legal rules treat the states as capable of entering into bargains. It treats them as somewhat autonomous in that way. And so the idea that Congress, and even less the president, can come in well after the deal's been struck, whatever the deal is, and say, now we're just going to start yanking the funding, that seems like that's a problem. Again, both because it's after the fact, it's coercive, and also it's Congress's power and not the president's.
Okay, so help me understand this. California had terrible fires last year. The federal government has not shown up with the disaster relief money that California has sought, but they're saying Texas can have everything it needs because of and they haven't given North Carolina everything either, but Texas can have everything it needs, they say. How does that work?
Well, I mean, now we get to the part of the issue being that, you have a largely Republican-controlled Congress. So even if you say, well, it's up to Congress to spend the money, appropriate the money, can Congress play politics with the money? Yeah, they can. I mean, should they? No, right? They obviously should not.
But they didn't, right? They didn't write into law that we're going to fund this state and not that state.
Right.
God knows that they're not above it, but they didn't do it.
They didn't do it, and there also aren't like criteria in the law either. So it isn't like the law says you have to, yes, for floods, but not for fires or something like that.
Right.
And that's why I think we see and are seeing lawsuits by states, state attorneys general in particular, saying this is Congress appropriated this money. It has disaster relief. We meet the criteria for it. In many of these cases, the promise was also made. And now we are trying to recover, or we are trying to get the courts to compel Congress to actually disperse the funding. Yeah. And I think we're going to continue to see more of these cases. I mean, states are well positioned to be the plaintiffs in those kinds of lawsuits because it's the state that's on the hook for paying, obviously, if it doesn't have the money. So it has injury, it has all the things that it should have. So in theory, they should all have not just good legal claims, but good constitutional claims to be getting that funding.
So should I take comfort in knowing that these kinds of disputes have been a constant in American history? Or are these kinds of disputes, do they show up most of the time when we are at our most fractured, as in the 1850s?
It's a great question. I think I would be wary of taking... You're the
person I can ask that question.
I am that person. I think, so one part of the response is to say, this isn't totally new, right? And that is clearly true. And again, I think to the extent people today are sort of surprised by or even cynical, like, oh, all you blue states, now you're into states' rights and federalism just because you don't like who's in the center, and therefore your states' rights claims are illegitimate. You're just being opportunistic when really we know states' rights claims belong to conservatives. Well, that's just not right. I mean, states' rights, whoever the state is, are baked into our system. Now, not full sovereignty. They don't get to secede. We know that. And they don't get to, as you mentioned, there's all these things the Constitution prohibits. They can't do treaties. They can't coin their own money. However, so I think we can say these disputes have been with us since the beginning. We can also say states' rights are real. It isn't just opportunism. There's a real set of values there that have come from all parts of our legal and constitutional tradition. And do these arguments show up when we're at our most fractured? Is this a warning sign? Yes, for sure. Because I think what you saw in the 1850s was this idea of the political system had, I mean, it's funny, when you read old histories of the beginning of the Civil War, people say, oh, well, the political system had contained, quote unquote, the slavery question, and people had compromised, and then the political system broke down. Well, you might think, now certainly from our perspective, that political system based on compromise around slavery was corrupt for lots of obvious moral reasons. So it's not clear that you wanted that compromise or that system to be stable. But I think these kinds of existential questions about can governors resist, or what about the police, or is the president going to abide by the courts? We've never had questions at that level of existential constitutional question across the political spectrum before. I think that is something that's new and unique to this moment, and quite frankly, incredibly distressing.
Terribly distressing and frightening. Before I get to that, I have just a couple more sort of foundational questions that I don't understand. So one of the other issues that states' rights raises is a kind of a uniformity question. And we had this problem, I'm thinking, before Obergefell for a little while. A gay couple could get married in Massachusetts and, honeymoon in South Carolina, except they weren't married when they crossed the border. And I think about ending birthright citizenship, and I guess that means you're a citizen of the United States if you were born in Illinois. But if you grow up and you can vote and you can do all those things, but then if you move to Tennessee, you can't. And I don't know how you have a country if citizenship changes if you move 80 miles, in the continent. What are the uniformity questions, and where does that show up in the Constitution?
Yeah, the uniformity, I would call it an imperative, is all over the Constitution, because part of what the impetus for the Constitution was, part of it was saying we're not just a bunch of nation states that kind of interact together for some purposes but not others. There's a real desire to create something that is a union that can act as a whole. And some types of issues need and have always needed a nationwide rule. And I think, again, if you go back to the pre-Civil War period, I think it was true that to the extent that people said, some states can be free states and some states protect slavery, and that's going to work out just fine. Well, of course it doesn't work out just fine. Again, sort of bracketing the immorality of slavery, because people move around, and you're talking about people. And so issues that involve people moving around have to have a nationwide rule ultimately, and that's part of what the argument is about, because you can't just have a local rule for some things. And so everybody knows at some level the fight about the patchwork quilt is a fight about the whole quilt. But the birthright citizenship example is a particularly striking one, because the whole point of the 14th Amendment, when it was drafted in 1868, so the years immediately after the Civil War, which ended in 1865, they're drafting the 14th Amendment from 65 to 68 until it's ratified in 68. And the whole purpose of the 14th Amendment is to say, essentially, we have a union and a nation, especially when it comes to citizenship. So there is a nationwide rule. That's clear from the way the 14th Amendment is written and everything it says. And that nationwide rule is birthright citizenship. And it's not only, confined to people who had formerly been enslaved. That's not what the 14th Amendment actually says. So the point of the 14th Amendment is both uniformity, nationhood, and then the substance of the rule is real birthright citizenship, not this hodgepodge of some places are not going to have birthright citizenship. That's just not at all what the 14th Amendment says. And so, this is where we get into also the conservative legal movement, the Supreme Court, the claim of sort of history and tradition. Well, the history of the 14th Amendment is very clear on this, about the meaning and reach of birthright citizenship.
Yeah. While we're on the 14th Amendment, so Colorado says, we're going to have a trial. Oh, we find that Donald Trump is an insurrectionist, and we're not going to have him on our ballot because the 14th Amendment doesn't allow people who swore an oath and then committed insurrection to be on the ballot. And then the Supreme Court waited as long as they possibly could and then said, no. And I'm guessing the no was that they wrestled with the idea that uniformity triumphed over, I don't know, the plain meaning of the text. And so they thought, does that sound right? What? That they did, because I can understand the difficulty if every state got to decide this question on its own.
Right, and that is something the court said in the decision in Trump versus Anderson, and it came up at the oral arguments, this notion that, wait a minute, so we're saying that one state can decide the whole thing. And I think there's a couple of problems with that as the rationale for the case, for the decision. So one is, no one was saying Colorado decides for the entire nation. It was Colorado decides for Colorado.
Yep.
And then there are other states. Two, again, reading the 14th Amendment, and that's Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, the court sort of read out or deliberately overlooked the fact that nowhere in the text of the 14th Amendment did it say Congress is the only player that can disqualify. The court said that. The court was like, you know what, it can't be state by state because that would be a patchwork. So the only disqualification power sits with Congress. Well, that's actually contrary to the text of the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment empowers Congress to enforce the amendments, but it doesn't say...
But it also says Congress is the only one who can get rid of the disability. So they have to take an action to get rid of the disability, I think.
Yes. And I think this notion that they, again, contrary to what the court usually espouses as its methodology on these things, they sort of say, like, oh, realistically, it wouldn't work to have a patchwork. And I think it's not right about how the patchwork would actually unfold. And then they say, and if we don't want a patchwork, the only actor who could do this is Congress. Well, that's not anywhere in the text. In fact, much of election law in the Constitution and in all the statutes since does rely on the states to do a fair amount of kind of the undercurrent and the inner workings of election law. So they read in this mandatory provision that only Congress, where it was totally inappropriate, and then they worried about the patchwork in a way that wasn't actually realistic. That feels like a make-weight argument.
Yeah, I wanted to be a plaintiff in Illinois in the same case. Yeah, I'm terrified by this ruling in some ways, because it's the court saying, look, we found an area of our Constitution that's unworkable, so we're going to write it out. But that's not the job of jurists.
Right, especially when we, in many of the recent cases from the court, get a lot of discussion or a lot of this mood-setting language of judicial modesty. The court's role is not to make law. This back and forth, I think, in the birthright citizenship case between Justice Barrett and Justice Sotomayor and Justice Jackson about someone's endorsing judicial overreach and judicial imperialism. So they claim to have this modesty, but it seems very selective when they decide to be modest and when they don't.
Yes, selective and partial. Yeah, I know. Yeah. It's awful. I have a different question. I don't understand the 10th Amendment. And the 10th Amendment is really short. I mean, it's the one that's related to the conversation we're having, because it says, I just wrote it down because I want to read it. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. I guess that's meant to define federalism in the Constitution, or reserve powers for the states. But the first biggest question, the thing I've never understood, is it also says, or to the people. What are the powers that are reserved to the people in the 10th Amendment?
Well, I love the 10th Amendment because it's very interesting. It's short. It's a lot of fun to teach, and there are all these deep questions. So first, it's the place in the text of the Constitution, as you suggested, that most clearly says, yeah, we have a system of federalism. Again, we don't have a completely 100% centralized national government, but we also don't have just a kind of confederation or league. And that's what is being recognized in the 10th Amendment. But then there are a couple of interesting things about it that sort of within what it says. So first is, and this came up in the Supreme Court in the very early period in the 18 teens, where you would get states coming in and saying, of course we can, let's say, tax the Bank of the United States. This is an argument that Maryland makes in 1819, where they say, we hate the Bank of the United States, and Maryland is like, we're going to tax it out of existence. And one of their arguments is, states' rights allow that. That bank is sitting in Baltimore, so of course Maryland can tax it. One of the things the Supreme Court says in response and in telling Maryland, you're wrong, you can't tax the bank out of existence, is the court notes in the predecessor to the Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, which really was our first Constitution, we just don't call it the Constitution, the Articles of Confederation had a similar provision to the 10th Amendment, and the article said the powers not expressly delegated to the United States. So what did that mean? That meant if it's not in the list of the Articles of Confederation powers that the central government has, the central government doesn't have those powers. The Supreme Court in 1819, in this case about Maryland and the bank, says, note that the 10th Amendment no longer says expressly. So we can assume that the federal government, the national government, has powers that are a little bit larger than the kind of very close, strict reading of the text of the Constitution. So there's this question about what does it mean to have power delegated to the United States? And the court in 1819 says, those powers are not just the most limited reading of the text. Okay, so that's like the first part, which I think is interesting because it reminds us the Constitution's not written on a blank slate. People have American and British law before that about how to think about the scope of the power. Second, yes, as you said, it's not just about the states. There's this language about this reserved to the states respectively or to the people. I think this reminds us that the players in the American political constitutional system are not just this binary of the states versus the federal government. And sometimes federalism sounds like that. It's like, Washington says X and Springfield says Y, or, it's New York versus Washington, or it's California or Texas versus D.C. But the text of the Constitution expressly says the people, and I think of that as we the people. I mean, it's the preamble of the Constitution. Mm-hmm. We the people still have a vast reserve of power. We haven't granted it all to these institutions and said the rest of us are just out of the picture. And so that, I think, is something that, frankly, gets read out of the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment is the kind of thing states waive when they want to say, D.C., we don't like what you're doing. But the or to the people language means we the people could waive that at our state government or the federal government. We can say, and this is interesting in a moment when we have this surging populism, that the people are, in fact, even in the 10th Amendment, where we're talking about state power, the people have a place in the ongoing running of government. And so,
has anybody ever brought cases about that?
Not specifically. I mean, I'm sure people have tried to make that argument, but there haven't been any successful cases that sort of say, because it says or to the people something. I mean, it's hard to think about, like, what would someone actually be pointing to that language for? But I think we could look at it and say the Constitution isn't a dead, static document. If the people said, we want to amend the Constitution, which Article 5 of the Constitution tells us how to do, it's not illegitimate to talk about that. I think sometimes there are some political actors, especially on the right, who act like the Constitution is dead, perfect, and to be venerated. And it's a living document that could be amended.
Only when you and I talk about changing, because they're all around the states trying to get a convention of the states so they can stop the government from taxing businesses. They are all in. Yeah, yeah. All right. Before we go, you gave a talk. You spoke at the graduation of the law school at the University of Chicago, and you said to lawyers who are not. I mean, I raised one, so I they're in my. I care about them, but they. You said to them, you have a particular calling in this moment. Would you talk about the role of lawyers in this fraught time? Yes.
I mean, I think lawyers have an enormous role to play and always do. But one of the things I said in the graduation remarks was, there are lots of parts of universities and higher education, which itself is under attack at the moment, that are about training people in methods and training people in a discipline and hugely important modes of training like that. But law schools are different in that we are training people in a body of knowledge in the law, and there is such a thing. We use a body of knowledge. We use a particular set of methods. But part of what law schools do and part of what lawyers have is holding a bit of the power of the government, both because we're we the people, but also because we get to have this kind of special role. And in most states, when you become a lawyer and you are sworn in as a member of the bar, there's an oath and you support the Constitution of the United States and the state. But lawyers are also referred to when they are sworn in as officers of the court. And so I think part of what I was trying to do in the graduation address, with a lot of discussion of Abraham Lincoln getting lieutenants from West Point in 1861 when the Civil War was breaking out, was this idea that we need educated young people who have the best and most rigorous training, and the lawyers who have that training have a public purpose and duty. And even though, of course, plenty of people who graduate from law school go to work in law firms and businesses, they're not doing public service work necessarily. But lawyers are still holding a piece of the power of the government, and they swear an oath, and they are officers of the court. So I think it's a particularly urgent moment for all lawyers, but especially the newest ranks of lawyers, the graduates, people just joining the profession.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. But how does it feel then to look at what goes on in, I don't know, the court in the Abrego Garcia case, where the judge has said, I don't know if the duty of candor is something that you learned in law school. The assumption of regular order, where the government gets some deference, is like, I can't trust it anymore. What do you think when you see members of this profession bend the rules past the point where they can stand up straight?
Well, I think there's a very strong current right now in the country and in public discourse that says, essentially, law is a tool of power. And if you believe in law, if you believe that there's even, not handed down from the mountaintop law, but if you believe that law has some content to it, you're just kind of a chump. You're fooling yourself. You're sort of starry-eyed or naive or something. And my response to that is, the people who wrote our Constitution were not starry-eyed or naive, and they didn't think everyone was going to play nicely and we'll just write all these things down and we're all wearing wigs and isn't it great and genteel. This is what I said to my constitutional law class in the spring. I said that law is made for crisis. The Constitution is made for crisis. And so I think to abandon law and sort of say, oh, it's just a tool of the powerful, which it certainly can be, but I think that's a big mistake. I think that's wrong descriptively. And I think it's also a huge mistake for liberals, progressives, moderates, frankly, to give up on. Rule of law is hard, but rule of law is about restraining power, not because we think that's going to be easy, but because we all agree that that's better than just naked power being exercised. So
yeah.
I think I think we have an obligation, and that's the American thing. Yeah.
The distinction you're making is between the rule of law and the rule by law. And in lots of the world, I spent a lot of time working in the Emirates and in Saudi Arabia, and they have law and they rule by law. But there isn't rule of law. There isn't a set of rules that applies to everybody equally, where everybody has a chance to defend themselves, to stand up and say, hey, you know what? I'm protected against that. And that's the difference between being free and not.
Yes, I agree. And, the sort of foundational elements of like cases being treated like, there are things that are so basic you don't usually say them in a law school classroom, like there is such a thing as law and law restrains power. But increasingly we have to go back to those bedrock principles because they are what's under threat. But it should make us feel pretty confident about them, because if they're so core, then we should be defending them. It's not a political or a partisan thing anymore. It's about something that's so foundational.
Yeah, but it is under attack. And I think, and you're not going to say this, but I'm saying it, I think it's under attack by the President of the United States, which absolutely terrifies me. Absolutely terrifies me.
Well, it's definitely, it's a really, I mean, honestly, kind of unprecedented in lots of ways and frightening time.
So you met these new lawyers, and out they go in the world, and they've taken your Constitution class, and they understand not that this document lives, that it's got ambiguity in it. We've talked about some of that in this last 45 minutes. And it's their job to make it an instrument of American freedom by restraining power. I think that's pretty marvelous. And I hope they're out there doing their job every day. And and it doesn't matter if they're defending a corporation in a courtroom and defending even somebody who's fired somebody that I think they shouldn't have. If they do it in the structure of the law, they make the law stronger for everybody, I think.
Yeah, I mean, one of the tests of whether something is a legal principle or just something you happen to believe, any of us happens to believe, is can you think of an example of a situation where you don't win, your side doesn't win, but you would still stick to the principle? Because it's easy to come up with a set of supposed principles that just end up being everything I like wins. But the real test, and this is true in sort of an intellectual sense, but also in a civic sense, is, okay, but let's say it's not your side or your horse that wins in that particular race. Can we still say, yeah, but that's how we know we have a real principle? And we should want those examples. We should be able to identify. Yeah.
But the top one that comes to my mind isn't a legal example. It's elections. And this crowd no longer thinks if they lose, elections are legitimate. That is something that should motivate everybody to get up in the morning and go to work.
Yeah, it also feels pretty basic. I mean, I think it's a kindergarten axiom of, you can't always get what you want, right? But you understand that the system has some integrity to it, and you have a shot the next time. Well,
you and I, speaking of next time, have run out of this time. I would love to do this again. By the way, I have about 100 other questions. I'm not a lawyer and never have been, but I'd love to sit in on your constitutional law class. It's so interesting, and the history that you bring to it is so fascinating and at once comforting and terrifying. But it does tell me that if we're lucky and work hard, we might get through this.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen some terrible things, and that is certainly something one learns studying the antebellum period. There was a point when I was working on my most recent book, and I thought every single person is tragic or terrible, and some of them are both, that I'm writing about. But That's the story. That's what we need to understand.
Has your book been banned in any state?
Not as far as I know, not yet, but we'll see.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining me. Tell everybody about your books, where they can get them.
Well, thank you. So the one that talks about some of the things we've been talking about is called The Interbellum Constitution, and that's interbellum. The book talks about why. The Interbellum Constitution, Union, Commerce, and Slavery in the Age of Federalism. It came out in May of 2024. I think it's generally widely available in all the usual book-selling locations. And then the book before that was called The Ideological Origins of American Federalism, and that one's about the founding period. So the Constitutional Convention and Madison, Adams, Jefferson, all of those characters. Same thing. But yes, I like to tell a story, and I think complicated ideas about things like law and constitutions can be told well through narrative. So that's especially the Interbellum Constitution book's effort.
Thank you. Thank you for the book, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much.
Take care. All right, everybody, we're going to take a break for the news and head to North Carolina when we come back.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Anderson Clayton, the intrepid leader of the North Carolina Dems, is back. She has built an unbelievable organization in North Carolina. It's astonishing. Ever since, well, even in the terrible election last November, she had big wins in her state. And, it's not just elections. Really, it's not. It's all kinds of things. For example, this year, she kept Republicans from throwing out tens of thousands of votes in order to steal a Supreme Court race in that state. And believe me, if they'd gotten away with it there, you'd be seeing that in every state across the country. So this work is enormously important for us everywhere. And now she's got a U.S. Senate seat, an open seat to win. Anderson, welcome back.
Thanks for having us. We really appreciate it. And you give me far too much credit. It is because of all the fantastic volunteers that we have that are now part of the North Carolina Dems that we were able to do such incredible things last year. But I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, in fairness, I agree with you. You've got a great team. You got a great team, and you've kept them together and you've kept them motivated. And we'll talk about that a little bit. But the people are doing remarkable work. But even before we talk about politics, I understand that once again there's been some flooding in your state, and I know it's nothing like what just happened in Texas. But is everybody okay?
We did, unfortunately, tropical depression Chantel that we saw come through the sort of the southeastern part of the United States and then came up through North Carolina. It really hit central North Carolina harder. The eastern part of our state where the beach is used to sort of getting that type of weather and sort of that much rain. But the central part of our state had really never seen anything like it. And so you had communities like Durham, Chapel Hill, Mebane for the first time that had massive amounts of flooding where 80 plus people had to be evacuated from their homes. It was just really, really scary, to be honest. And even my backyard in Roxborough in Person County, where I live right now, saw tremendous amounts of it too. And it was just it was one of the first times that I feel like a lot of people felt climate change very, very close to their backyard and was just not used to that, to be honest. But everybody is okay. We did have an unfortunate, I think it was about 3 people that actually ended up losing their lives because they got trapped in weather and everything else. But nothing to your point like we saw in Texas for that. So
has the cleanup, where are we? You had these terrible floods last year in Asheville. Has that been cleaned up?
I mean, it's going to take years to come back from Hurricane Helene that hit western North Carolina, about 25 counties throughout the western part of the state last year. And Josh Stein, I think our Democratic governor, has been doing an incredible job of trying to make sure that he is putting to be honest with y'all, putting the screws to the legislature and making sure that they are giving money to western North Carolina like they need to for hurricane relief, because we saw Donald Trump, deny FEMA extensions for western North Carolina for 3 different times that our governor has now asked for it. And the state legislature is, honestly have refused to help fund western North Carolina relief because they also cannot pass a state budget right now. They just recently, this last week, went in and actually did approve finally money for western North Carolina relief after they recognized that both the Republicans in our state House and our state Senate were not going to be able to pass a budget this year because they cannot agree with each other on which budget they should be using. And so they had to pass a separate bill alone to be able to get western North Carolina state funding to be able to give out grants for small businesses and such like that.
They can't agree on which budget to pass. You mean the cruel one or the crueler one?
No, literally. I mean, it's the Republicans in the House cannot agree with the Republicans in the Senate on how much to cut, essentially. Yeah. And we're at a place right now where Josh Stein has asked for, his budget proposal was a 10% raise on teacher pay in the state of North Carolina, and our state legislature is arguing whether or not to give them 3. So that's where we sit right now.
They just don't believe that government has a role in our health, our education, and our general welfare, do they? They just think it's there to protect corporate property.
I mean, I agree with that. And I think that there are so many people in our legislature right now who just care about their own agenda versus caring about the fact that they are supposed to be there to to work out the people's agenda. And, the number one thing that you go into a legislature, when you're a state legislator, the one job that you have is to pass a state budget. I mean, that's just basics of if you don't have a budget, you don't have a way to operate your business. And right now, Republicans who are supposed to be best in business, right, are refusing to acknowledge sort of the staple thing that we need to be able to move forward as a state.
Yeah, they're trapped. I mean, they've just so poisoned Americans, their own constituents' view of what government is, that people can't get help anymore from government. They've managed to poison the whole idea of this enterprise, the thing we do together, which is government.
Well, and they've done that in North Carolina for, the last 15 years probably that Republicans have had control of our state legislature. And North Carolina wasn't always like that. North Carolina used to be a state where you had a Democratic legislature and a Democratic governor. And I think it's really important to know that when Democrats had control of this state, the number one thing that they did was invest in public education. When Republicans took control of it in 2010, it became we have got to deny and we have got to degrade public education in this state to the point where they have now given away billions of dollars over the next decade to private school vouchers to take away money from public education in North Carolina. The teacher raises that we're fighting for, or that the governor is fighting for in his budget right now, is just trying to come back from where Republicans have lowered teacher pay so much over the last 10 years. Like we're just trying to give back teachers what the state used to do for them, actually. And I think it just goes to show that we've seen that in North Carolina right now, and just how much our state legislature is hurting communities with that.
I try and be open-minded about ways to improve education, and markets might be a way, but we now have really a couple of decades of evidence that the voucher systems that have been put in place in state after state do not help students, do not improve outcomes. They just don't do what they say they do at all.
No, and it doesn't give. And also, we have got one of the least accountable voucher programs in the entire country. So when you look at it, there is no stipulation on the amount of money that you make that you can't receive a voucher anymore. So you have people that make six figures a year that can qualify for these voucher programs. I mean, it's not actually helping people that you think would like to see their child, or especially students with disabilities. We still have vouchers that are going to majority religious schools. We still have schools that are receiving state funding right now from these private school vouchers that can deny kids with disabilities. I mean, it is not, if you're going to get public school money, you've got to take public kids. And that means anybody under the rainbow, under the sun, that comes to your school and says, we want to be able to have entry here, and we can pay for it. And that's not something that you see right now from a state legislature in Raleigh. They are trying to use the school voucher system to resegregate our schools, honestly. And when you look at a place that, like North Carolina, that, does not have a private school, especially in every rural county in the state, I'm like, you're taking money out of rural school systems and giving them to urban areas, honestly, because that's what's happening. And that's where you're having to bus kids or send kids or drive kids into or 45 or an hour drive to another county. And it really does not make sense when you're thinking about that education is supposed to be a pillar of a community foundation,
It also doesn't make political sense. I mean, rural America is the Republicans' base, and they seem to be at war with it, not just in education, but in healthcare as well.
I think that what we saw last week, 17 million people lost health insurance, and it is going to drastically impact rural communities the most. And I can't for the life of me understand why Republicans are so dead set on killing the communities that they represent and that they're from. But it to me is really sad when you see how many folks sat in Congress and were willing to do that to their own constituents, to be honest.
Oh, Anderson, what this Congress did, it was more than sad. I mean, they created a national concentration camp system and the staff to fill it up. It's just hideous, the amount of money they're spending on an internal police force and giving money to the wealthiest and sticking it to rural America and anybody they don't like. I've never seen anything like it.
No, genuinely. I don't know how you go back. Like every time I think that I have, and being a party chair for the Democrats, I think that so many times I sit there and I say, I understand that Republicans are the lowest of the low sometimes, but this was, to your point, it was just a different level of, I don't know how that you're going to go back and say that you don't know somebody on SNAP benefits or on Medicaid or Medicare right now who is scared of losing that health insurance, and you're going to go back and look them in the eye and say, yeah, I'm the one that voted to take it away. North Carolina right now is predicted by 2028 that we won't even have SNAP anymore. It won't be something that the state can provide because, we're going to lose 1.4 million people are going to lose SNAP benefits from the federal government. And that would mean that the state legislature would have to fork over about $240 million a year to be able to keep SNAP up. That's the legislature that I just told you couldn't pass a budget. You think that they're going to be able to help people that are hungry right now in our state? Absolutely not. And
2028 is not that long away.
No. And I think that it's crazy to me. It's crazy to me that we're going to lose a service that we have had for 40 years and that all of a sudden and people are just fine with it going away. That Republicans have just said, okay, well, they can live without it. And I'm like, well, they obviously haven't been the last 40 years. But, I think our job has always got to be getting out there and talking to people, especially in rural communities right now. I think that our party having seeded such a vocal opposition in those communities for so long has not helped the fact, because people look at me all the time and they're like, yeah, well, rural people keep voting for them, and I'm like, well, that has a lot to do with information silos and gerrymandering and whether or not that, rural people actually understand what's happening to them. And if no one is there to tell it to them and no one is there to be the oppositional voice in a community sometimes, like, they're never going to know. And the silos only get stronger.
You've done two things. You've recruited people to run everywhere, which is unbelievably amazing. I think you got somebody to run in almost every race right away, which is really amazing and hard to do because people have to run in races where they honestly can't win the first time. And no chance, but they're out there delivering the message and you've got them to do it. But you're also, you've launched this summer a rural tour. So talk about that and how it's going.
We've been we're doing a 50 county rural tour this summer. And I think that sometimes when political parties or when candidates do tours, it sort of gets a little, I don't know. I think it can get a little bit like, oh, that's a media appearance in some ways. And this rural tour for me has been so enlightening because we really tried to go around and actually, engage with communities, but also be able to see and tour facilities in rural places. So one of the favorite ones that I've been to so far has been Halifax County in southeastern North Carolina has got a center for rural energy education, and it's the only one of its kind in rural North Carolina. But it's a solar farm that invested in creating a education center for kids in Halifax County and rural people to learn about clean energy. And I had no idea that it existed. And Mosine Lowe, who runs the facility, is now offering coding classes for teenagers in high school, and they do that for free every summer. And it is it's a place where they're offering sort of skills and life lessons and learning for young people. And they made this a really big part of community investment. And it was just such a cool thing, I think, to see come out of rural North Carolina, because everybody always thinks that, clean energy and climate change doesn't have a real way to be talked about in those communities. And I'm like, no, rural places are the place to talk about climate change in, actually, because, farmers are experiencing it more and more and more each year. And so I thought it was one of those things where you really would not know it unless you had been to the county. And it's helping me understand each one of my counties in a way that I just don't think the party has before. But we're also bringing candidates out with us and trying to make sure. The number one critique that I always hear from folks is that candidates don't show up in communities until 3 months before an election or 6 months before an election. And I'm about a year and a half out from an election, and I have my Supreme Court justice out everywhere with me. She is trying to help socialize her name to people, because our court races are often the most forgotten about races on the ballot. And so her getting out there and being able to to introduce herself. Justice Earls has been on the bench in North Carolina for 8 years now, since 2018, and she's an incredible civil rights attorney and somebody that has been working in rural North Carolina for a long time. And so a lot of the folks in a lot of the counties that we're going to really remember her out there also. So it's just important to get candidates out there and show their faces early.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I loved this description you just gave for a couple of reasons. But one is people think Democrats, they just focus on like government programs. And there's a lot of talk about government programs for sure. But what you led with was what I love the most, which is you take people out into a community and you see not what government's doing, but what citizens are doing, what private companies are doing. And you're able to highlight the things that they do that are so remarkable in helping others in the community. And here you focused on that solar farm and the extra programming they do and how helpful that is. And I bet you see that everywhere. And I think people respond when folks in government are able to say to folks in the private sector, wow, what you're doing is just so great for everybody.
I agree with you. I think it's one of the things. I did it a year ago. We toured an FQHC, which is a federally qualified health center for anybody that does not know. And we toured it in eastern North Carolina, in Martin County, in Hertford County. We were in a Hosky. But Martin County is another county in the Northeast that lost their hospital because we didn't expand Medicaid in the 10 years that North Carolina had the opportunity to. And this FQHC that's popped up in Hertford County did so because there was a healthcare desert in eastern North Carolina. And one of the biggest things that I learned from touring that FQHC was the fact that sickle cell disease is one of the biggest sort of problem diseases that you have in eastern North Carolina. And it's really interesting to me, I think, to learn about what plagues a community and also what people are trying to do to help it, because it also makes you a better spokesperson to go out and talk to other areas and other regions. And I won't ever forget that about eastern North Carolina. And that FQHC looked at me, the folks that run it, and they said, sickle cell disease is one of the hardest diseases to get research funding for. And it's because of the fact that, it's an invisible disease, honestly. It's under your skin. And so I think it's so important for elected officials, for even our party, to understand the issues that communities are facing, because when people look at me and they say the Democratic Party has got a messaging problem, I think that we have a local messaging problem, that we don't make our message local enough to the people that's going to impact the most, Yeah,
we talk about government and we talk about government programs, but that's talking about, in some ways, since we are in that business, it's talking about ourselves. And instead, we have to talk about the people, the businesses, the communities, and then the programs to help will flow from that. But it's the other way. But that's the direction it has to come, and that's what you're doing.
Yeah. And honestly, it's just a great way to get out in our state. I think that we were in Stanley County last night, which is sort of one of the counties that hugs Mecklenburg County, where Charlotte is in North Carolina. And it's a very tiny county, but we had about 85 people out there at a rural tour stop. And honestly, they had such good questions. And the county party out there was like, I have never seen this many people in a room before. And they were so excited. And I just think it also shows that we've got energy everywhere. Jones County in the eastern part of the state is organized for the first time with a county party in 45 years. And so it's also a time for us to mobilize Democrats in every single corner of the state and make sure that we do have the infrastructure that's set up for 2026 to make sure candidates can get out all across it.
And let me just get the image in all of our heads. Like when you meet, where do you meet? In churches, in I don't know, in auditoriums that are attached.
I'll be honest with you. I was in a hospital last night. It's anywhere. We've been in breweries. We've been in, community centers. We've been in churches. We have been in courtrooms, which was fun when you've got all your judicial candidates out there. Chowan County, we got to be in the oldest courtroom in North Carolina, where they still hold North Carolina Supreme Court sessions and stuff like that.
Wow.
And so it's fun because I think you get to experience a lot of different locations. We did Parker's Barbecue for one of them. So we fed everybody and we were like, hey, come on, have dinner with us and let's hear about what's going on in Wilson. And And I just think it's a great way to also utilize facilities that people are like the folks that work at those facilities then also have to hear what's going on and what you're doing there and everything else. So you're pulling people into politics that wouldn't have really engaged with it beforehand too.
And you get to share these stories that these assets of your state. So you can find something that you love in a county in southeastern North Carolina and share that story and that information with somebody in the western part of the state. And you begin to build a stronger state just by virtue of being able to tell people what's going on in different parts of it.
Yeah, I mean, that is honestly, it makes you the best, I think, or the most knowledgeable person about your state. And it really does emphasize that we can name you somebody in any county in North Carolina that could help you do X, Y, or Z there. And the other thing it's really setting up well is that, now we have a map of the state and in each county where we can go and host an event as the Democratic Party. And for 2026, that's really important when you're looking at statewide candidates that are going to want to know that information early. And they're also, the state party has got a lot of collateral that we can set up and give to candidates now that you would not have had before. And it's also unlocking people and communities that are going to be important to help tell their stories. Like when we were in Martin County, we talked to a guy who had his daughter with him the entire time. We were sitting there for about 2 hours during this listening session that we were doing. There was a guy, he had his daughter in the back, and he was waiting very patiently to tell a story to us about how his daughter was on Medicaid. And he said, I write Tom Tillis's office every single day. I write Richard or Ted Budd's office every single day, and I try to tell them that taking away her health insurance is not going to help her survive. And he said, what else can I do? He said, I keep getting told by district office staff that this is not going to happen, that, the BBB is not going to take away her health insurance. And he said, but I know that is not true. And I told him, I said, we need to get a microphone in front of you. And I said, we need to make sure that you're getting that story in front of press, that you're getting that story in front of your family members and your neighbors, because the best messenger that we have right now for what's going to happen in Washington, D.C. is someone like you who's impacted by it the most. And I just think like having these stops are also helping us elevate people's stories that maybe would not have told them otherwise, and that's also part of the encouragement.
I love this about democracy. The work that you do it is also getting ready to win, but it also just builds a stronger community, a safer state, a more positive and forward-looking place. It's just the best. Hey, you sent out the greatest 4th of July message I read. You want to talk a little bit about that? It's radio, so there are a few words you can't use, but I thought it was fabulous.
Well, I said the F-bomb a little too much for folks here on the radio that were listening right now, but I think I got frustrated after. I get frustrated anytime people give up. I will say that. And I think maybe that is the organizer in me, that is the rural in me. Like I know right now things are really hard, and it's almost impossible to think that we can change the direction of this country again, but it is possible. And the moment that people start believing that it's impossible is the moment where the other side wins. And I felt like people needed a kick in the behind after the BBB passed, because everybody trying to make that not happen. And what we ended up doing was really trying to promote the fact that people have got to be stronger, and that people have got to say, no, we're not going to give up, and we're going to go back out there and still talk to our neighbors and talk to our friends and family. And I told folks, I was like, if you're upset with the Democratic Party right now and you're not interested in getting involved with us, fine. Like, pick something, pick an organization, pick something that you care about, that you want to be a part of, because the minute that we say that we're not going to get involved anymore, that we're just going to lay down and give up, I'm like, the Republicans win every time. And I do not know why we would be interested in letting people that just stripped 17 million people of health insurance have the ability to go do more of it. I
thought it was, by the way, if you were listening, you can find it on social media and just follow Anderson, because you should anyway. But it's a great message. And you know what? It is the updated and contemporary sounding version of a letter that George Washington wrote from Valley Forge in the darkest moment of the Revolutionary War. And he said to the folks in Congress who were hiding or in New York playing with the British, buck up, folks. We're out here fighting, and this is worth fighting for.
Yeah, no, genuinely. I think that was, I'm trying to figure out how to say it without all the F-bombs, to be honest with you. And I think that gets a little bit harder sometimes, but I just, people can't give up. And the moment that we do, I don't understand. And maybe that's also, I tell people all the time, I'm like, being from rural North Carolina, you're not used to winning elections. And so the moment that you do, it's like, oh my God, we've done something. But a lot of it is really about the fight. Like, it is about putting up a fight. It's about showing that you still have one. And it's about showing that not everybody in a community agrees with what's happening right now. And I think about that so often, and I'm like, you can't be that easy to give up,
Yes, and the great majority of Americans agree with you. They do not like what they're seeing from this corrupt and cruel administration, and they don't like it in the states either. I know it's rigged by gerrymandering and everything else, but we still have a voice, a really powerful voice, if we get together and use it. Hey, you have now an open Senate seat.
I do indeed. Tom Tillis decided that he could no longer. I say to people, I'm like, Tom Tillis had to run away from the Republican Party. He didn't recognize it anymore. Yeah. And not many people do, I think, when you're looking at folks that are. We had a couple Republicans come out to our stop last night in Stanley County, and they were like, I do not know what this party has become. And they were big Reagan fans, honestly. And I'm like, whoa, when we're starting to get Reagan Republicans involved with the Democratic Party, now you know that something is going on, I think. But
yeah, but we'll take them, right? We're big enough to say, come on in.
That's what I mean. I'm like, when you've got folks like that felt the way about that they did about Ronald Reagan, that are saying Donald Trump has gone a little too far for me, I'm like, wow, we have reached a different level of politics in the state of North Carolina, I think. But Tom Tillis is, I think a lot of people are trying to give Tom Tillis credit for not voting for the BBB, and truly I give him that credit alone. But I think that, he already had sold out the state of North Carolina when he was the confirming vote on Pete Hegseth and Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr. and people right now that are also putting folks' lives at risk in other ways. I mean, the VA alone has had over 8,000 jobs cut to it. And it's like RFK Jr. is out there saying, folks, that we don't need vaccines anymore. It's, It is devastating, too, I think, for the type of people that he's empowered in this country.
Yeah, and I think he looked at his home state, and he looked at what you have built and your team and all those people who you've given on-ramps to be part of this, and he said, you know what, I'm not going to win, so I might as well salvage some of what's left of my reputation and head for the hills.
Well, and Republicans actually had to put out a memo, to their donors nationally. They said, oh, it's okay, guys. Like, Tom Tillis not being our nominee is going to be okay. He was down 9 points anyway in polling. Yeah. In their internal polling that they had, they said that he was down 9 points. And I looked at them and I was like, yeah, he's down 9 points because he's been Donald Trump's rubber stamp. North Carolinians do not want someone who is just going to rubber stamp Trump's agenda over and over again. They want someone that's going to go up there and actually think on behalf of North Carolina. And we're going to be excited to send someone next year to Washington, D.C. that's going to do just that. And we are building on.
Yeah, I am so excited about that. And that's going to draw a lot of people in, I think. It's going to help you register lots of voters and carry down ballot races. It's going to kind of be you're going to have fun.
Well, and honestly, we already were. I tell people, I'm like, we had already done about 35 Tillis accountability canvases so far this year. Yeah. We have about 33,000 active volunteers with the North Carolina Dems. And I feel a lot of energy already on the ground in the state alone to be able to defeat not just a Republican U.S. Senate candidate, but also our Supreme Court fight again in 26 with holding that seat with Justice Nina Earls, too. Yep.
All right. We got 30 seconds. Tell everybody listening why they should care about what's going on in North Carolina and why they should support the North Carolina Dems.
Because if North Carolina had not been a gerrymandered state, Hakeem Jeffries would be Speaker of the House right now, and there would be a check on Donald Trump's agenda. We are paying the price right now for ignoring the state of North Carolina in 2020 and in 2022, and we do not anticipate for the national party and national apparatus to do that again to us, because North Carolina is the future of the South, but also the future of the Democratic Party. And we need to make sure that we take back and that we repeal racial and partisan gerrymandering in the state by 2028, which we will do with our Supreme Court. And we're going to give 4 more United States House of Representatives seats back to the Democrats, along with 2 Democratic senators that we're going to have both up in 2026 and in 2028. So we got a lot of power left to give to the national level, and we're excited to do it.
All right, everybody, you heard it. Thank you, Anderson. It's great to catch up.
Thank you so much. Bad one.
Bye. Bye.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody, welcome back. I thought that was fabulous. You know, sometimes you hear from people around the ground doing the work, and you are confident we're going to be able to pull this off. But it isn't just the work on the ground; it's the media ecosystem that we're all living in. And David Neer, he created the Daily Kos Elections, and now he has his own site called Down Ballot. The data and information he provides are just so important. And at the same time, his embrace of reader-supported journalism means he's free from the vagaries and the prejudices of advertisers. David's work on elections, in that sense, parallels work on news on local governments that, for instance, you've heard here when Dan Nakanian comes on and talks about the work at Bolts. This stuff is just so important. It's just we have to get a news ecosystem that gets important facts to Americans in this time of radical political and journalist disruption. David, thank you for joining me.
Edwin, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Hey, for folks who don't know, and I'm guessing that's most of my audience since this is your first time here, will you introduce everybody to Down Ballot? Talk about what you do and some of the stories you cover?
Absolutely. So the full name of the site is The Down Ballot, and you can find us at the-downballot.com. We are a Substack newsletter, so if you are someone who subscribes to Substacks and use their apps, you can also find us in the Substack app. And every weekday, we publish a newsletter called The Morning Digest. And what we do is we try to shine light on all of the thousands of elections below the presidency. That's why we called it the Down Ballot, because in the U.S., obviously, the presidency is the most important office, and elections for the president, of course, take center stage. But believe it or not, Edwin, there are 500,000 elected offices in the United States. It's a totally wild number, and so many of them are so critical and wield so much power over our lives and shape the direction of our democracy. And so every day at the Down Ballot, we share the most important news from races for the Senate all the way down to city council.
I am a big believer in local government and its impact on people's lives. So it's really important. And I know just even in my own city of Chicago, which is, well watered with journalists, that local news is getting less attention than it used to.
Yeah, there's just no question about that. The troubles, it's really, that's too mild of a word. The calamity facing the media landscape in this nation that's been plaguing it for years and years really only seems to keep getting worse. And local journalism has taken the hardest hit by far. But there is a flip side to this that I want to point out, which is we run a 2-person shop. The Down Ballot is just myself and my managing editor, Jeff Singer, fantastic fellow. And we are able to cover news all around the country thanks to the internet. The internet has obviously caused grave problems to the media and also with misinformation and just the spread of horrible algorithmic choices that are, delivering misinformation to people. But at the same time, it also allows us to, for instance, like you were talking about Chicago, to read all of the newspapers in Chicago and all the TV stations and all the radio stations and figure out what's going on locally. So it really is an extraordinary time, because this work would have been almost impossible to do in the pre-internet era. There were some folks doing it, and it was extremely, extremely hard. But we can really shine a light on elections from coast to coast.
Yeah, really important, and important for us to understand our nation better, also to understand the political opportunities better. What are some of the recent stories that you found most illustrative?
So in recent years, there is a state that I want to highlight, which, forgive me, folks from Illinois, but Wisconsin elections are always fascinating and exciting, and it is the ultimate swing state. And in particular, the battle for the Wisconsin Supreme Court, people really began to understand in recent years, and in particular on the progressive side of the aisle, the importance of these state Supreme Courts. And just a couple of years ago, liberals and Democrats finally took back control of the Wisconsin Supreme Court after 15 years. They had to fight for 15 years. And
let's pause and just say, bravo, Janet Protasewicz.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, what an incredible race that was.
Incredible.
She really put it all out there. She made it very clear what she stood for in terms of opposing gerrymandering and believing in reproductive freedom for women. And that was an incredible battle. And, 10 years ago, people were not paying as close attention to races like that. And we just saw, of course, a few months ago, the control of that majority was once again up for grabs, and Elon Musk dumped in $25 million to try to steal that race, and he face planted. He tried to buy it, and it wasn't for sale. And so I love the fact that folks are paying more and more attention to these kinds of down ballot races, that, like I said, the Wisconsin Supreme Court, the decisions they make affect so many people on so many issues, and including abortion and voting rights and the environment and so much more. And people are really tuning into them now.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time on Wisconsin here in the show, and I and people who listen to the show and other hosts on this station all spent time going door to door up in Wisconsin in the last couple cycles. It's something that people from all around can do, and it makes a big difference.
Oh, absolutely. And that's you allude to something else that's so important, which is that folks these days can get engaged and plugged in politically in ways that were really quite difficult in previous eras. Because if you didn't have an interesting election going on near you, okay, maybe you could get on a bus and, schlep to a swing state, and plenty of people still do that, and that's still really important. But at the same time, if that's not possible for you, you can, for instance, do virtual phone banking. You can make calls into voters in a district that's thousands of miles away from the comfort of your own home, and you can also figure out who to donate to much more easily, and very easily be able to go on Act Blue, for instance, and donate $25 if you're able to a candidate across the country. So the opportunities for activism are just incredibly magnified these days. Yeah.
So looking around the country as you do, at races, let me just focus on Democrats for a minute.
Sure.
We're in this. In such an interesting moment, because a good chunk of our base has lost their patience and is just, angry with the Democrats who are in office for not fighting harder. Whether that's fair or not, it's true. And so you see this, we have to get rid of everybody who's been there. We need a whole new team. You saw this transitional election in the city of New York. There's still a lot of very old members of Congress. Are they going to all get primaried?
Look, you're absolutely right about the anger that's out there, and a lot of it is justified. And the Democratic Party, I sometimes hear people say, well, why do you always talk about the age of Democrats? What about Republicans? Well, let Republicans worry about their problems. For the folks who are fighting for democracy, you want a strong and healthy Democratic Party, and you don't want seats becoming vacant because elderly Democrats are, dying in the middle of their terms in office. So to me, it's extremely understandable. It's a sentiment that I certainly sympathize with and share. And, you know, a lot of these Democrats who have been around for a very long time really do need to start thinking about moving on. And if you want to secure your legacy, the best way to do that is to groom a successor, to help someone win office who is going to carry on your mission. You don't leave a legacy by dying in the middle of your term. And, you know, we are starting to see, we've seen a couple of more senior House Democrats decide that they are going to move on and retire, and others have already landed primary challenges. Every single one is not going to land a primary challenge, and of course, the quality of those primary challenges is going to differ a great deal. But I do think that incumbent Democrats who have been around a long time, they really need to understand this anger that you talk about, because I've never seen anger like this on the Democratic side. In certain respects, it reminds me of the Tea Party rage against incumbent Republicans. It's very different in many ways, too. But that reshaped the GOP, and Democrats could really find themselves reshaped, especially through primaries, because of this anger right now.
Yeah, I am all for a resurgent, younger, strong Democratic Party, but it has to be able to win.
Yep.
And I want to say to my friends on the left and the center, find a way to get along with each other.
Yep.
You know, I mean, I want to say to Andrew Cuomo, you ran a race, you lost. Like, do not now run as an independent. That's just enormously damaging. Let's move forward.
Absolutely. And, you know, folks toward the center and center left will, you know, often exhort folks further to the left and say, your candidate didn't win, maybe someone more moderate than you like won the primary, but it's time to get on board. And that's certainly I understand those calls entirely. But now that you mentioned this situation in New York City, which is where I'm from, you have the inverse situation where the guy to the left won. And so all the times that centrists say, hey, you got to get on board. Well, now it's your turn. And it's been an interesting situation because Zoran Mamdani, the assemblyman who won the Democratic primary for mayor in New York City, obviously has excited a whole new generation of younger folks and brought folks out to vote who don't typically show up to vote. And that's a kind of enthusiasm that you want to find a way to harness. And we are seeing some of these more establishment Democrats realize that and say, you know what? He's our guy. He's tapped into something, and I'm going to endorse him, even if I supported someone else in the primary. The rest of the party simply needs to get on board now.
He won the primary. That's how it works. Yeah, I've been highly critical of supporters of Bernie Sanders who did not get on board and help Hillary Clinton win. The country is enormously worse off because of their petulance. And the same will be true of the center if they don't get on board with the primary winners and help us focus on the real threat that's in front of us.
I agree. The term that, I think is coming back into vogue, people talk about a popular front. And, that term obviously has associations with the far left. But, the fact is, anyone who cares about democracy right now, has to be rowing in the same direction. And you have this kind of wild spectrum where folks ranging from AOC to the Bulwark, which is, this also on Substack, a site of, ex-Republicans who are now pretty much Democrats and certainly very pro-democracy. You have this huge range of people who are all saying, yeah, we all got to, pull in the same direction here. There really isn't time for this kind of infighting. And, think about something, there's an Illinois election, actually, that I think about a lot, which is the race for governor all the way back in 1986, where you had members of the LaRouche movement, total fringe, cultists, win some Democratic primaries. And these folks were absolutely not acceptable. These were folks, if you were a mainstream Democrat, there was no way you could endorse him. And Adlai Stevenson III, he ran as an independent bid because that was just not acceptable. Unless you have a situation where you have a cult member win win a Democratic primary, then no, you pretty much got to endorse the primary winner.
Yeah, you made my palms sweat because I lived through that LaRouche moment here.
Oh boy, I thought that one might ring some bells.
It was awful. It was awful. And Mike Howlett Jr., who ran as the lieutenant governor in Adlai, they took a huge bullet for what was a failure of the Democrats at the time to alert people to people who were running in their party. The Republicans failed to do that alert, and Donald Trump took over their party. Here, the Democrats saved their party from crazy madness by alerting everybody to this problem and not just bowing down the way the right has when their party got taken over.
Absolutely. And I think it's telling that, Edwin, that I have to refer to an election that took place 40 years ago. I mean, I've racked my brain trying to think of similar examples, and that one always comes to the top of mind because it's so rare and so unusual. And, Democrats have a rather good history, especially in recent years, of nominating broadly popular, mainstream, acceptable candidates in their primaries. Mamdani's a little bit more to the left than most, but he's clearly popular. He won in a landslide.
And you know what? I wish him luck. I hope that he has great success. I love New York. And he wants to try some new policies. We'll see if they work. But I don't think he's even if he's not successful, he's not a threat to the nation.
Of course.
Right. and you say you have to go back 40 years, but that's only on the Democratic side.
Exactly.
The Republican side has been hijacked.
Absolutely.
Which is why your bulwark friends, who have been Republicans for 40 years, are now saying, wait a minute, that is not our party.
Well, I read the Bulwark. I don't personally know the folks over there. If they want to have me on one of their podcasts, I'd be happy to. But, and also the amazing thing is that we have seen time and time again Republicans fumble away general elections because they have nominated totally unacceptable lunatics. Whether it's someone like, Doug Mastriano, who ran for Pennsylvania governor and got blown out in 2022. Or
how about North Carolina governor?
So funny. Of course, I was about to mention that race. How could you not? That's something that really. It's a lot harder. I've tried to answer that question too. It's a lot harder to find examples of Democrats fumbling away races like that.
Yeah. All right. So, David, you guys also publish something called the Down Ballot Ultimate Data Guide. Tell people what that is and why that's important.
Absolutely. So you can find the Down Ballot Data Guide if you go to the-downballot.com. Our Ultimate Data Guide is linked right at the top of the site. And it's a collection of 20 years of open source political data that we've compiled, because it turns out, Edwin, that there is so much political information out there and election information out there that is really, really hard to find, or that you have to create yourself if you want it. And that's what we discovered over the years, that there was a lot of data out there that we wanted to answer certain questions to, and it was really difficult to be able to do that. So, for instance, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds here, but let's say a member of Congress decides to retire, since we've been talking about retirements, and you want to know which state legislators could run for that seat. Well, you're going to want to know the overlap between the congressional map and the state House map, or the state Senate map, let's say, to get a sense of which members of the legislature are already representing part of that district. And that's information that was very, very hard to find, but we compiled it in an accessible way. So when you have a retirement, like you do with Jan Schakowsky, for instance, in Chicago, you can see who are the likely candidates to try to run to succeed her, because they already represent part of her district. And so we have made this data that we have compiled over the decades for free. There is just tons and tons of stuff there for any real election nerds or people just looking for answers to questions that are hard to find answers to. Check out the Down Ballot's Ultimate Data Guide.
Yeah. And you guys, data is your thing. You also took time to unpack the last election.
I imagine you're referring to our calculations of the presidential results by congressional district.
Yep.
Yeah. That's our flagship data product, and one that people have been citing and using for years. And simply knowing how the presidential election went down on a congressional district level tells you so much about a congressional district. Because, let's say a candidate for the House, maybe they don't get a strong opponent one year and they win in a blowout 80-20, but in reality, the presidential candidate, the Democrat running for president, let's say Kamala Harris, only won 55% in that district. So maybe that Democrat is actually more vulnerable against a stronger opponent. And so understanding this baseline of how Kamala Harris and Donald Trump did in each congressional district is so important to understanding the battle for the House. And I should emphasize that this data, very few states publish it. They all could. It would be easy for them to do, but they don't. And so we have to manually compile this data, but we make it publicly available to the world. And it's another fantastic resource. And you will also find that on the top of the-downballot.com. We call it Pres by CD for short, presidential results by congressional district.
Yeah. So it's a great source. And let me just move out of politics for a second.
Sure.
And just talk about the importance of independent media in this moment.
Absolutely. Sorry.
You've made that change, and talk about that.
Yeah, I can't. I feel so strongly about this. When you have an autocratic government or a wannabe autocratic government like we do right now in the United States, we have seen.
Shocked.
Yeah, we have seen Donald Trump and his entire administration come after large corporate media outlets, and one by one they keep bowing down before him and paying for the privilege. It's absolutely disgusting and appalling. We've seen it multiple times now. But when you have a distributed network of small independent media sites, a robust constellation of small sites, even the most determined autocrat can't shut that all down. Because I don't think Donald Trump's going to come after the down ballot. He's welcome to try. But, even if he did, even if he came after a bunch of us, there would still be thousands of other sites still ready to tell the truth about what is going on. And when you put all your media eggs in basically just a few baskets, the big corporate media giants, they're so susceptible to being co-opted. But when you're talking about thousands of small independent sites that are in it because they want to be, because they care about this stuff, and they're supported by people who care about this stuff, not by indifferent advertisers, boy, I think even the most determined autocrat would have a hell of a time squashing the huge array of independent media that we have in this country now.
Yeah, I learned that, in New York, your city, there were dozens of local papers leading up to the Civil War, and that we are back in a moment where journalism, where there are lots and lots of independent journalist operations out there that are, as you say, hard to co-opt, have developed followings of people who trust them. Some of them are filled with lies, but most are people trying to do their job well, and any consumer can check lots of them and get a better sense of what's going on.
Yeah, there really is an incredible diversity of voices. At the same time, though, it's a difficult situation because, as you allude, with some of these outlets, of course, are just spewing nonsense or lies. How do you figure out which ones are trustworthy? Back in the day, it was a lot easier. You could pretty much trust the nightly news. You could pretty much trust the big daily newspapers in your city. And with those becoming less and less trustworthy, how do you figure out this huge array of small media sites? How do you figure out who is actually worthwhile? If you find one you trust, figure out who they trust. But also at the same time, this ecosystem, it's difficult to sustain. It's tough work, and there isn't enough money going into supporting this. This ecosystem needs more support from the nonprofit world in order to become sustainable. Because really, folks like myself and other small Substacks and other small newsletters on other platforms, we're scrapping every day to be able to stay in business.
Yep. It's I thank you for doing it. It's so important, and I don't know where this model will lead, but right now it's what we've got. So everybody, the down ballot.
Yes.
And you can find it, and you should sign up. You learn a lot, and you'll have a lot of data you can use. And, these next few months, oh my gosh, we're turning right back into election season. So it's very, very important.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you very much for that warm endorsement, Edwin. And yeah, we are ramping up coverage. I mean, that's the thing. You say it's election season in a few months. It's election season right now. Election season never stops. There's always stuff going on. We have so much news to talk about every day, and there's so many races to keep track of, and they're all important.
They are all important. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Absolutely. It's been a real pleasure. Have a terrific weekend.
Yep, you too. Take care. All right, everybody, we're going to take a break for the news, and then I have a really interesting author coming up whose expertise is unfortunately just what we need.
You're looking at the big picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Okay, everybody, welcome back. Look, we all know people who work overtime to shoehorn facts into already existing worldviews. Worldviews most people don't even recognize are shaped by propaganda. And it's a great pleasure to find, people with tremendous curiosity and the capacity for letting facts reveal themselves. Andrea Pitzer is somebody like that. She's a journalist, a podcaster, an author of books that do not fit into categories. She has a knack for rediscovering moments that, captured everybody's attention, then faded. And she reminds us how gripping those moments were. One of her books is about a famous, forgotten, and then she rediscovered polar expedition where people got stuck in the ice. Another is about her newest, about the secret resistance of Vladimir Nabokov. That one got my attention for sure. And one of her first is a deep dive into the history of concentration camps, which is unhappily the topic that I want to talk to her about today. Andrea, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Edwin. I'm glad to be here.
Oh, I'm glad you're here. I actually want to talk to you about Nabokov because, in part, he's the greatest writer I really dislike. But that has to take a back seat, I think, to the concentration camp questions right now. What Americans hear those words, and I think we're confused because, a couple generations have grown up on World War II stories, and so when they hear it, they think Auschwitz. Can you take some time to disentangle concentration camps from death camps? Talk a little bit about where they came from.
Sure. So I think, first of all, people kind of like, well, what is a concentration camp exactly? And so for the book that I wrote, which looked at it all over the globe for more than 100 years, I defined it as the mass civilian, so not POW camps, but mass civilian detention without any real trial. So if there was a trial, it was just a show trial or a big group, 100 people getting sentenced at once, something like that, done on the basis of race or ethnicity or religion or political party rather than actual crime that was committed. And it's almost always done to separate a targeted group from society, to remove them from society, and it's almost always also done to consolidate and build like political power. And we see a lot of that happening in the U.S. right now, but as you said, people think of Auschwitz when they think of that. And what a lot of people don't realize is that there was almost a decade of Nazi camps that existed before Auschwitz became a death camp. In fact, Auschwitz itself began as part of the regular Nazi concentration camp system. And that system in those opening years looked a lot like other systems that had existed over the prior 40 years around the world. Concentration camps were called that from the 1890s up, and they unfortunately were not unusual. And so that's one of the reasons that even though people realized the Nazi camps were bad, they didn't realize how singularly bad they became during the war at first, because we had the Soviet Gulag. We'd had colonial detention around the world in these far-flung territories that led to genocide. So camps had a bad reputation, but Auschwitz and the death camps that were instituted in mid-World War II, really brought that annihilation and that removal from society into actually death factories and eradicating people. But part of the reason for writing my book was that those camps didn't all vanish after 1945 around the world, and we are seeing them play out now in the U.S., and without knowing that there are things short of Auschwitz that are still horrific and dangerous and can put us on that same path, I think people don't know that we might be repeating that history ourselves.
Yeah, so interesting. I mean, civilian detention without due process is what these things, as you say, it's a great definition. And I think that they would have existed throughout human history if they could have, but I guess it requires some modern weaponry for a few people to be able to incarcerate so many.
Yes, so it was certainly we can look back on things like Spanish treatment of Native Americans in North and South America for centuries, British treatment, U.S. treatment, British treatment of colonial subjects. These kinds of camps had precursors. You think most Americans have probably heard of Trail of Tears, for instance, this mass relocation and closing people off. So it isn't as if people who are trying to sort of, in grim and dangerous ways, get power haven't tried to do these kinds of things. But it wasn't until the second half of the 19th century when you have the patenting and mass production of both barbed wire and automatic weapons that, as you said, you can end up with a small guard force capable of holding a lot of people. And that is where you I compare it to going from like the atomic bomb to the H-bomb, right? You sort of supercharged this idea of relocation and detention that existed before, but it's now much more lethal.
So starting in the 19th century, we have this, what would be recognized today as a concentration camp, this notion of civilians that are, for one reason or another, not favored by the government, removed from society without what we would recognize as due process. That sure sounds a lot like what we're going through, and I'm afraid what Congress just put $170 billion towards creating throughout the United States.
Well, that is one of the reasons I'm really trying to get the word out now. My book came out, and to be clear for any listeners that are out there, when I pitched this book, it was over a decade ago. When I started researching it and writing it, Obama was president. So I was concerned about these long-term trends, before Trump came on the scene, because we had these issues with the war on terror and Guantanamo, and some of these seeds I felt had been planted in really dangerous ways and weren't getting taken care of. And so I think there is some sharing of responsibility for us being where we are between Republicans and Democrats. But that said, the Trump administration, the first time out and now, are really, flooring the accelerator. And so with the budgetary allotment that you were just describing, it's an exponential growth of ICE, which what we're seeing happen right now is what's been done with prior funds, right? So what's going to be done is going to be several times more. And just for perspective, if people aren't aware, U.S. prison system is also not a great system, and it is potential that ICE detention will surpass U.S. Federal Bureau of Prison Detention. That's how much money that we're giving them. And it is likely to become the largest law enforcement agency in the country. And its agents right now are effectively on the streets masked, doing sweeps, disappearing some people that we haven't been able to find, although eventually we've been able to find most of them. Some people, the gay hairdresser, Andre, for those who followed the story of him being sent to El Salvador, we still have not been able to find what happened to him. So you have a masked police force disappearing people off the streets with very little accountability to existing law. We are definitely repeating this history, and we are arming the people with a lot of money for future worse things.
Help me understand the connection between the use of these camps. The government decides they need to remove a whole bunch of people without trial, without just because they want to do it, and they can. And you said that it's also used to consolidate power. How are those two ideas connected?
So one of the things, the reason I was talking about, that I started working on this a decade ago, is that sometimes people just want to look at Nazi camps or the Soviet Gulag and not sort of think about their own country. But in truth, every time a system has evolved in the world, there's this international influence and history of these kinds of camps that definitely you can see evolve globally over time. But in each case, it's really dependent on local culture inside each country. Who is the targeted group, and what are the sort of levers of hate and fear that you can be flipping to motivate people? And in the U.S., we have had a really strong anti-immigrant strain that has emerged again and again, even as it subsides sometimes, but for over a century. Thinking of how we denied citizenship to Asian and especially to Chinese Americans at the end of the 19th century into the 20th, Japanese American detention in camps during World War II. We think about Operation Wetback, as it was called. It's a slur, but it was part of the name of the thing in the 50s. And people were held in camps in that before they were deported deep into the Mexican desert, and many people died there. So it's this combination of the two. And where the power comes from, so there's always a group you can target if you use propaganda for long enough. But the power comes from the reason those people get targeted is because you can cow a population. Just speaking in very general numbers, about a quarter of any population tends to be deeply sympathetic to pretty authoritarian rule. And so those people are going to always be available to that kind of power grab. And then you're going to have a chunk of people who are never going to be interested in that. But there's a group in the middle. And the way you secure that group with political power, how you use political power to secure that group in the middle, is you terrify them, so you make them think they're under attack, and then you also create a setting in which stopping anything from happening is a really unpleasant experience for anybody that stands up. So you use fear, you use anger, you use manipulation, and you're looking for that tipping point that's enough people that you can either win an election, that you can browbeat people, that you can make it too difficult for resistance to happen. And this is one of the big dangers of this new budget, is that just to use another foreign example, let's say in 2016 in Russia, Vladimir Putin set up the Rosguardia, which was a national law enforcement force that answered directly to him, and it's the Russian National Guard technically, but they suppress domestic protests. So they now have a police force of hundreds of thousands that is really tied to the president, and that is what has effectively kept internal dissidents from being able to grow and develop, in addition to the targeting of people like Navalny that rise up. And so in the U.S., what that looks like is if this roving police force becomes bigger and bigger, and we do see the president wanting to target birthright citizenship, already doing that today, threatening Rosie O'Donnell and revoking her citizenship. If citizenship becomes fungible, then it's not just about immigrants, right? It becomes about whoever the president doesn't like. And unfortunately, we do see border protection. We do see ICE, that there's a lot of allegiance to the president and his agenda right now. And so I think for that political power to sort of keep that from happening, we're going to have to be really watching this ICE force that's going to be growing exponentially in the coming months.
So if I understand you, if the president wants to terrorize Americans into his corner, he has to say about the Walmart greeter that he's just arrested, to the guys picking strawberries in a field that he has just put in a camp. He has to say about all of them, I'm going after rapists and child murderers, and people are coming after your kids, which is what he's saying, even though it has no relation to who he's arrested. Is that right?
Yes, and so what's fascinating, I don't know if you saw it, but just at the end of the week, a new Gallup poll came out, and because it's getting tough, because they're being so aggressive about it. We see language from Stephen Miller that is incredibly aggressive about go to Home Depots, go to these places, round them up, 7-Elevens, why are you guys not arresting more? I mean, he's literally saying these things, and it's getting reported on. But more importantly, we see cameras where the local news people are talking to the community whose ice cream vendor of 30 years was just swept away. And people are seeing what's actually going on. And literally, the end of the week, the result just came out that it's an all-time high of Americans saying that immigrants are good for the country. And it has been a radical switch, and the switch has been no more radical than in any category that they looked at than in the Republican camp, which literally, since Trump came to office, Republican support for immigration, for immigrants specifically, has jumped more than 20 points just in these 4 months. And I think that it's that exactly what you're just framing there. It's this gap between the Walmart greeter being the guy that's getting arrested and Trump saying it's rapists and criminals. And when people can see that difference, then they are less afraid and they are less going to buy into it. Now, again, that quarter or so of the population is going to remain very devoted to this kind of leadership because they want to see somebody punished. But the majority of Americans, there's a lot of Americans that are racist or afraid of foreigners, and it's easy to play on that. And that's true in a lot of cultures. I'm not just going to single out only America here. Yeah. But they may not be racist and afraid of foreigners enough to buy what Trump is selling, because what they're selling is a really harsh recipe.
Yeah. So one area where we're beginning to see the gap is in his rhetoric over immigrants, right? And you still hear it from senators. I stood with a mother whose kid was murdered by an illegal, one of them will say. Okay, I'm in Chicago. There are plenty of murders, and they're not by immigrants. I mean, terrible things happen. And we need to arrest them.
Well, and there are some that are committed by immigrants. If you have a population of over 10 million people, there's going to be some. But we literally have 100 years of statistics that show that immigrants, probably because they don't want to be arrested, actually commit fewer crimes than citizens and native-born people.
Right. So we have this gap between the facts and the rhetoric about immigrants. We are about to have another gap between Americans' sense of who they are and the reality of concentration camps in 50 states. I mean, this thing they built in Florida, which now has prisoners in it, is I think, repellent to most Americans.
And I think they've oversold it with the merch and, what they are calling it. I don't like to call it that, but they're calling it Alligator Alcatraz, and the Republican Party in Florida is selling this merchandise for it. And I think that, again, they're selling that to their base, but they're misestimating, in my opinion, how appealing that's going to be to everyday Americans. And we already have the first reports out from the Everglades detention, the concentration camp there, and it is saying that they don't have regular access to water, that they aren't being given the meds that they arrived with if some of them have medical conditions, that there's flooding, that there's maggots in the food. I mean, this is not, this is not the kind of ship-shape camp that they're promoting it as by a long shot.
So we have an example. Kristi Noem goes down to El Salvador and has a fashion shoot in front of men detained in the CICOT prison. And the reaction to that across the great majority of America was disgust. And that was true of plenty of Republicans. They were just, that was a bridge too far. We're seeing this now start to play. Americans aren't going to want people in a prison that exists because a campaign donor of Ron DeSantis's got a contract to build a shoddy prison in the middle of a swamp. They're not going to like that.
No, I think they won't, and so it's really important for, I do different kinds of reporting and journalism as well as writing books, and it's really important, I think, to emphasize the money trail in all this, because it's a tremendously corrupt enterprise. Detention in America has long been one, and this kind of ad hoc, overnight stuff springing up is really rife for things like no-bid contracts and just really, really dangerous ways that will be terrible for the people detained, like in the conditions they're going to be detained in, and a boondoggle for friends of the administration. And nobody likes their tax dollars going to things where they feel like they're being ripped off. And so I feel like sometimes with Trump, everybody has such strong feelings about him that it's actually more effective to talk about what's happening on the ground than just, I hate Trump, I love Trump. You know, like people don't change their minds about that. But if you show them what's happening locally, if you have local journalists where they are still surviving, and God knows there's not nearly enough of them in the country anymore, but if you have local TV stations, if you have local community groups educating people on what detention is happening there and what is happening to their literal community if it becomes dependent on these kinds of operations, you know, that's a really dangerous road to go down. And I think people will not want to do it. But we do already see plans. As you mentioned, Trump has said that he would like to see these all over the country. And we already see some solicitations coming out in the sort of government contract site where they list these things for detention, for instance, at Fort Bliss and some other places. So it's definitely those wheels are rolling, and I think that we probably need to be acting, you know, in the next 6 to 8 months to try to put the brakes on as much of this as possible, because one of the things that concentration camp history shows us is once this stuff is entrenched, it takes on a momentum of its own that is sometimes far more than was imagined even by the people who sort of ushered it in and started it. And so we don't want to end up with a massive system of this kind that then is available to whoever comes after Trump.
So the reason I asked the questions the way I did is to sort of outline the areas where we can fight back. The gap between the reality and the rhetoric on immigration is one. The gap between our sense of who we are as Americans and the existence of these concentration camps is one. The American disgust with government corruption is a third. And you've just put a fourth on the table, which is, you know what, these things always expand. And you can expect if they do it that a year from now, that, you know, with untrained people they're just giving bounties to fill the 10,000 hires, that they're going to be taking dissidents as well. And that also is going to run the wrong way. So these are the areas that I can think of. And if you have more, I'd love to hear them. But that we should
I have
talk
a bunch
about
more.
Every day.
Yeah,
well,
I have Go ahead. I know I have concrete thoughts on what people need to do. So outside of the times where you have like a cult of personality figure die, say like Joseph Stalin, which really ushered in the end of the Soviet gulag in a lot of ways, or like the Nazi camps, which were ended by defeat in war. Outside of those kinds of situations, the things that have helped societies come back once they've had camp systems are to keep independent courts is the first thing. And about that, I would say I, as an outsider, and I don't report on the court, but I follow it closely, the Supreme Court seems to me to already be compromised and perhaps even corrupt in some ways. But it is still vital to have those lower court decisions, which overwhelmingly are standing for democracy and going against this sort of power grab that Trump is doing. And that gives tremendous moral authority to people that are standing against the administration itself. And so those are successful in slowing and stopping some things along the way. But even if they get quashed in the end, it is still a public record, and it gives tremendous moral force to the second part of how people get out of this, which is that protests are really critical. And I know some people think, that doesn't do anything, but in fact, it lets people network and find out who else is against the administration and who else is willing to take action. And the bigger they become, the more they start to feel like the winning side. But literally, they also, in 2020, there's been studies that have been done, and they found that the Black Lives Matter protests, there was a huge backlash against them right after they happened, but a few months later, they actually influenced the election in some important ways. And it was clear that where the protests had the most effect was actually in smaller communities, less educated communities, and whiter communities. And my theory, and this is just my own guess, so I want to be clear, this is not part of the researchers, is that those demonstrations, that those communities might either be totally checked out of politics, or they might only be listening to a really narrow band of information, and they literally didn't know the information that was put out through those protests. And so I think helping support legal aid groups that are doing stuff with the courts and communities and families that have been detained to keep the whole court system as vital as possible, and then also actually speaking up, educating people, and doing protests. Those are two really important ways in addition to the ones that you named.
I'm so glad that we got a chance to talk. Your work is, I know that you do podcasts. You've written about a lot of things, but this one has captured your time now because it's so important. And I'm so grateful to you for it's not your latest book, but you're sticking with it and focusing on it, in ways that are impactful.
I will be happy when it becomes completely irrelevant, but we're not there yet. We are not there yet for a while.
We're not. Now, is it true that you are actually licensed to carry a rifle in polar bear country?
I am in the high Norwegian Arctic. I've been on 4 expeditions, and in 2023, I got certified to carry a rifle against polar bears in the high Norwegian Arctic.
I hope you've never had to use it.
No, that's the goal. The goal is to never actually shoot a bear. So.
Yeah, or get eaten by one.
Or get eaten also, yes, also very important.
Yeah. Well, look, so you hang out in dangerous places, clearly, like the central, like the part of American democracy that is worried about concentration camps. Really, I'm proud that you joined us today. I'm very, very impressed with your work. And you know what? With your curiosity, which is unusual these days. I mean, you're definitely a polymath, and it's fun.
Well, thank you. And I just tell everybody else, don't wait for a guru to tell you what to do. If something looks wrong, find a way to move against it, because that's really what we're all going to have to do to get out of this. Yeah.
Thank you, Andrea. Really, really, really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Edwin. Take care.
Bye. All right, everybody. We're going to take a break, and I'm going to take your calls when we come back.
Edwin Eisendrath is taking your calls now at 773-763-9278. The Big Picture is on now. WCPT 820.
Okay, Jim, kick us off.
Hi, Edwin. I've got to get my hands on some of that Trump vino. If you can alter reality like this cabinet's done, and you can't tell me that the governor of Texas wasn't loaded when he gave the New Broccoli speech this week, or Netanyahu saying that Trump deserves the Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, these people are definitely on some kind of a mind-altering drug. ThereThere's no question about it. You got the most... I can't even describe this cabinet. You've got Kennedy, who doesn't know a thing about medicine. Every doctor worth their salt is like, well, he's nuts. He's nuts. You've got climate scientists saying that this was a debacle that should have never happened down in Texas. If they were well organized and well manned, it never would have happened. But that's not the point. They don't want to hear it from experts. The Republican Party, they don't want to hear that. The Republican Party is only concerned about, I don't know what they're concerned, because he's a lame duck, 80 years old. Are they going to run Stephen Miller in 2028 or whatever, if we make it that far? I mean, because they can't run this Peter Thiel clone. So I think it would be Stephen Miller to continue this and continue immigration as their biggest political.
I don't know what they're going to do, and I don't care. What are we going to do?
No,
because we have to get. I know. Showcase our talent, pick some great candidates, and the only thing that will keep us safe is getting these people out of power.
Oh, absolutely. That's a must. But look at the investigations they got going. They don't investigate anything that's germane to anything. They've got Joe Biden's doctor on the stand for I don't know how many hours, and he's not answering their questions about his mental acuity because he's not. That isn't his position to do it. He was there physically, his heart's still ticking, and so on and so forth. He's not going to give you a psychiatric exam, but they're demanding it from him anyway. But that's what a circus is, Edwin. And we'll be back. We're not going to give up the ship here with these maniacs. They're not going to run us out of town. Anyway, have a good weekend. Thank you, Edwin.
You bet. Thank you. All righty. Well, always interesting. Nancy.
Hi, Edwin. I don't know what to say first. May I be bitterly honest with you?
Have you been hiding that from me? Have you been hiding it from me all these times?
No, maybe not. But now I'm really PO'd because I'm so sick and tired of hearing nothing but, I don't care who I listen to, and I don't listen to that many anymore. Believe me, after November 5th, I quit on a lot of things. I will fight my own fight, and I will fight to the death, and that's probably what it's going to come to. But what I'm really sick and tired of is all you guys blaming the voters all the time. You know what? Bernie Sanders did not stop Hillary Clinton. I'll tell you who stopped Hillary Clinton were the felons and the, criminals that were running against her, and the moderate Democrats who still don't know how to fight these guys. You sit there all day and give me all kinds of excuses as to, oh, look what he's doing, and why couldn't he get away with this? He can get away with it because they led him. They never knew how to fight back from the cons, and they still don't. And then they turn around and they blame the voters. That's BS. You know who the Clintons and Obama affected and how they screwed up 2016? They didn't support Bernie or Joe Biden. They screwed Joe Biden more than they did anybody else. He should have been in there in 2016, and he would have been in there in 2020, and we would have never seen the likes of that damn felon. That's all I got to say.
Okay. Well, that's a point of view. I try not to blame the voters. I do think sometimes on our side we look at each other and get angry with each other in ways that aren't helpful. But I know who the advocate is.
Look what they're doing to Mondami in New York, and look what they did to David Hogg. Right away, the old farts, if they don't like what you're saying, I'm telling you, the moderate Democrats are the ones who are screwing all this up. It's not the cons. The cons can sit back and watch the moderates destroy all of us. They don't listen to the progressives. The reason that Biden did so well in his administration is because they did listen to Bernie Sanders and the progressives. But no, let them go, screw around with everything and not admit anything. And these guys, that's how we have the fascists in our White House again, when we should have never had him in there in the first place if they knew what the hell they were doing. And I'm sorry, but that's it. I'm tired of everything. It's all BS.
All right. Well, again, that's a point of view, Nancy. It's a point of view. I will talk to you next week. Paul, you're next.
I really resonated with your opening commentary this week, Edwin. You're right on all the time, but it's so uncanny that the day after the big bill of goods is passed, this terrible tragedy happens in Texas, and as you said, that the Biden administration had provided funding. This was during Biden's term for exactly that. And by the way, here in Washington State, we have not gotten the funding, the FEMA funding that the Biden administration had authorized for the giant wind bomb cyclone that we had in the week before Thanksgiving, which, by the way, knocked out a lot of the reason it was so widespread is because a lot of high-tension, high-voltage power lines were knocked out. And a lot of this is federal infrastructure, which we fixed because we had to get the power up, but are not getting reimbursed for. I was just talking to my representative Susan Delbetti's office about this, and they're just stiffing people. And I'm sorry, but you have, I guess it was Jim, and I understand Nancy's frustration. These people, Kristi Noem is a psychopath. I mean, she's putting out her Western wardrobe photos, I guess, for to vote on my pictures, and people are dying, swept away for absolutely no reason. It was completely avoidable. And even if you don't have the National Weather Service, I mean, I'm from the Midwest. I was just living there for 5 years with my mother, and even I can walk outside on a hot, humid evening and say, uh-oh, this looks like tornado weather, and go inside and say, hey, Mom, let's go sit downstairs before they give us the tornado warning so she doesn't panic, and fall down the stairs when they give the siren go off or whatever. Let's go sit down. And sure enough, now here it comes through on my phone, and we have to sit down here for another hour. I'll get you something to drink. And if a rain bomb comes that drops 300 inches in an hour, I think you can see it coming. You can see it in the air. You can see it in the sky. It's been dropping water all along the way. And why there weren't local law enforcement going to these camps and saying, everybody out now, right now. You can't leave it to the counselors to make that decision. They're looking after the kids. This is just a complete – and then this other nut, Greg Abbott, is giving this a football analogy. Well, he takes well like football. You don't start blaming the other guy because we're going to pull this one out. I'm sorry. We ain't pulling it out. There are hundreds of people dead. I mean, what is with this? And then Trump and his dad don't know what to say to people. We offer our warmest condolences, and no, we did everything perfectly. And Kristi Noem has this. I don't know. I'm just repeating the news. I feel like it's just beyond. Because, as you say, though, from a faith point of view, these people are addicted. They're in chains. They are in the slavery and the shackles of their own greed, gluttony, jealousy. That's what's in power right now. And I don't know.
Well,
Go ahead.
The lies that you have just talked about, the Greg Abbott press conference, the Donald Trump visit, the Kristi Noem press conference, where they talk about everything they did right and how we're so brave that we're going to get through it. And look, my heart is broken for the people who got swept away, and I am very impressed with the Texans who go out afterwards and try and cut through the fallen trees and find everybody. But I was raised that an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure, no matter how brave those guys are working in the pound of cure. And they didn't want that ounce of prevention. No, they did not, because it came from you and me. They didn't want it. They wouldn't take it.
Well, you know
so
what?
They're going to cut through the trees.
When I was back in Michigan.
Hang on one sec. One more thing, and then the lies that they told about that. You've heard me say on this show a bunch. Reality has a way of breaking through. And you can watch Fox News from now to the cows come home. You can't ignore that hundreds of people got swept away. The reality breaks in, and we find out that all the things they've told us are lies. Go ahead.
Well, the people that came to the meetings, the public meetings on taking the money, this is exactly what I experienced living in Livingston County, Michigan, where my mom lived, at the county commissioners' meetings, where one county commissioner, and I challenged him at the meeting. I said, "You're not taking $1.5 million for the county in COVID relief, but you complain about Detroit's getting everything, and it's racist. You didn't take the money for the broadband and for the rural areas. The rural areas of Livingston County are still on dial-up. They didn't take there's some other things they didn't take. That comes to mind. I challenged him on all this. He told me COVID's over with. COVID's over. And people are sitting in this room is all Republicans. They probably wanted to eat me up or eat me alive, but I didn't care. And they didn't take Homeland Security money for the law enforcement, for the county sheriff, because this is the same thing. This was coming from evil. These are communists. And so they don't take the money. And then what they did was they talk about how Biden promises, but he doesn't deliver. And then the next thing they did, and they've done this in Wisconsin too. This is a trick. The COVID relief money that Michigan got, $9 billion in COVID relief money, which the legislature did not spend. And the law says that if there's a budget surplus, it must trigger an automatic tax cut. Well, Governor Whitmer said, no. This isn't because Michigan citizens are being overtaxed. This money, this $9 billion, came from the federal government, and you refuse to spend it. So she did some things to make it so, make some rebates, tax rebates, so that they would go below the threshold that would trigger the automatic tax cut. And they said, she's playing whatever kind of, juke and jive to keep you from getting the tax cuts that you deserve. And they're the ones who didn't spend the money.
Hardball. What she was playing was hardball, the kind of thing that we want to see Democrats do. You know what? We know how to do it too. Good for her.
Yeah,
well, shoot, another week, and it was a bad one, a really bad one. We got it. We now have these ice raids increasing in frequency, increasing in their brazenness. We had a man fall off a roof and die in one of the raids this week, and they're in court saying we do not believe people should have due process. What do you mean they should have due process? We think that's wrong. That is Stephen Miller's hope that the president can create an unaccountable internal police force and round us all up. It's vastly un-American.
Federal troops in Los Angeles for a month now.
Yep,
a month, and they're and they're going to find a way. They're going to find an excuse to tell us that, like they used to tell us how, Seattle's perpetually on fire. The Capitol Hill and University District. It's just chaos now. They'll find a way to send federal troops here and provoke something, and that's what they're doing in Chicago at that museum. Where I was. That was disgusting. Yeah, I mean they're going to do this because remember what Tom Holman said. There are 500 areas, and I thought, you mean the 500 counties that Democrats won in 2016, 2020, and 24. That's the Democratic stronghold. That's where they're going to harass and terrorize us, and hopefully try to shut the election down by next November. I guarantee it. There's going to be a lot more federal enforcement troops, whatever, in the blue cities, probably even here, even though it's completely peaceful, as you know, always like it always is. They'll find some excuse to do it to try and intimidate not to vote. But, of course, we vote by mail, but they'll probably complain about that, too.
Yeah. Well, we have a lot of work to do. It's the bottom line. The reality is what it is. We have a lot of work to do. Thank you for being part of it, Paul. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Edward. Bye-bye.
You bet. Cynthia, how are things in Denver?
Hey, I love your program. Thank you for always having fabulous guests on. I kind of hope that the Dems are infusing themselves with younger folks and that they take Project 2025 plans and reverse them and run on that for the midterms. Everything that was cut, it could be built back better. Get the young folks involved for all of their ideas for every department that was cut, and just turn this into what the future wants for their country. I hope that someone in the Democratic Party is, eyeing that option instead of, sticking to worn and torn propaganda statements, because since the Republicans put so much work into Project 2025, it shouldn't be that difficult to use it as a template and go back and repair and upgrade. What do you think?
I think we absolutely have to take on Project 2025. And you've heard me on this show. I think we have to take the symbols of fascist power and destroy them. I want to take Mar-a-Lago and make it into a museum on American fascism. We have to take their symbols from them, and we have to reverse all of the things that they have done. I mean, every one of these corrupt camps they're going to build, these internment camps, concentration camps, we have to destroy when we come back into power. Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think also they have to speak plain English and let people know what is wrong, and I do have to give Hakeem Jeffries a little bit of credit for being willing to go. I think he's going to Louisiana. If he could lose that Nancy Pelosi speak, and just talk, straightforward. This is why your Medicaid is disappearing instead of talking like a professor,
well, we have to do. Yeah, I agree with you. He's got to do it. We all have to do it. I mean, to talk to people who they're taking away their health care. They're taking away your health care. And I don't even think we should call it Medicare. I don't think we should use federal program names. Say, look, they're taking away your health care. Your hospital's going to shut down. They've taken money from your public schools. Your school's going to shut down. And by the way, I think Democrats should very proudly grab a book by Toni Morrison and walk it back into a library.
Yeah, I agree. So that's where the youth come in, because they are more, and I say youth, I'd say 40 on down, 40 on down, because I'm 67. And,
well, so am I, Cynthia, and I'm not giving up yet. I want the youth to step up, and I welcome them, but I am going to fight this fight going forward as long as I can.
Me too. Good show, Edwin. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Really appreciate it, Cynthia.
Take care.
All righty. Let's head to Florida and Eduardo.
Hey, Edwin. Over there in California with these protests, they found a guy who was shooting. Obviously, it's not happening with every protest. But the FBI is looking for this guy. And this is when you have somebody like that brandishing a gun at these protests, that just defeats the protests that you're trying to, pass to the general public when somebody, does that. I mean, they should only be arresting people with criminal backgrounds, like in Omaha, Nebraska. They got somebody with MS-13 and an associate. They had killed 5 people back in El Salvador. So that's a justifiable arrest. But there are innocent people being scooped up, and that's very disappointing. That's something they're going to have to correct.
Where are you going with this, Eduardo? So far, I agree. Yep, there are criminals, and arresting criminals is great. And then, by the way, and when we arrest them, they should have a trial. But instead, they're scooping people up with no due process. And that's terrible. And as for the guy with the gun, I saw a video of him. We need peaceful, disciplined protest. Peaceful, disciplined protest. No, and I know there will be. Yeah, and I don't know who that guy with the gun is. Whether he was a provocateur or somebody on our side, but it's not acceptable.
Yeah, but just one more thing before you go. These injunctions, my understanding is they're really not. They're going to ignore them because they really are looking for the Supreme Court to slap them down. These, because the Supreme Court slapped down these injunctions. And my understanding is like only the Supreme Court can tell the president what to do, and all these other judges, they're like mute. They really can't tell them. That's my interpretation of these. When the Supreme Court comes out with something, but I don't know, maybe somebody disagrees with that, but that's my interpretation, that the Supreme Court is the only one that can tell the president what to do.
It's not. Well, maybe. The others can tell them what not to, what they can't do. And for instance, on birthright citizenship, the Supreme Court said you can't have a nationwide injunction, but you can certify a class and have a class action suit. And
there
that's
you go.
What happened.
Yeah, there you
go. And the judge, the district court judge said, yep, here's the class, and you can't get rid of birthright citizenship. So
There we go. Yeah.
I am proud of our judiciary. It has continued to have its independence. Judicial appointments made by Republicans as well as Democrats, even some of them that were made by Trump, have not done what Trump wanted. There's something in that legal training that has kept the Supreme Court worries me for sure, but the rest of the judicial system has held and is pushing back pretty hard.
Yeah. Okay, Edwin. Thank you very much for your time. Have a good weekend.
You bet. You bet. Well, listen, everybody. I just want to remind you. The show is a little on the depressing side. I don't mean it to be, but we covered some serious stuff. But you also got to hear, like in North Carolina from Anderson, about the things that are happening on the ground where Democrats are organizing and reaching out and not just putting candidates in a position to win, but by virtue of going and talking to neighbors in every part of the state, strengthening civil society in the state, making communities stronger just by showing up and asking people, what are you doing to make the place better and how can I help you? And if we do that, we make our society stronger, and a stronger society is more resilient in the face of, lies. If you know your neighbors, if you know them, you're not going to believe it when some politician says, 11 of them are rapists and criminals who came here illegally and we're going to get them. You're going to go, no, this is the guy. I see him every day. That's not right. So the work of politics, when you're out there talking to neighbors, talking to community members about what they're doing and how you can work with them to strengthen your neighborhood, just something as small as your neighborhood, makes everyone more resilient and more resistant to the claims of fascism. And that's something everybody can do. Everybody. And it's something all of us must do. I can't stress that enough. And look, today we heard from someone who has studied the history of concentration camps, right? And is certain that that's what we are building here. Americans don't want that, right? We heard from an expert on the relationship between federal and state power. And you heard that states have power, that we can organize in them and fight back, right? You heard from somebody who's doing independent journalism about how important that is. And you've heard lots of people on this show whose journalism you can support and help diversify the sources of news that you have to support the individuals trying to get stories out in a trusted way across this country. So we are not helpless, and we are not going down without a fight. These guys are bringing it to us. What happened in Texas, I'll end where I began, what happened there with the cruelty and the hate that blinded people so much that they would not accept help that they clearly needed before this disaster. And then the disaster came. And again, I didn't read the quotes from the people who went to those meetings and demanded that they not take our money because it's dirty. And then this terrible thing. I didn't read those quotes because I am angry with them. My heart goes out actually to them for buying this propaganda and having their shame forever on YouTube haunt them the rest of their lives and haunt their children who will be able to see mom and dad out there saying, we don't need any of this money. We're going to be fine. Their money's terrible. And then the kids get washed away. It's heartbreaking. But we can, as we did after AIDS, that terrible, terrible scourge, we changed hearts and minds. We stood up and demanded that everybody see each other as a human being. And we pushed back against hate successfully. And I talked about that at the beginning of the show because I lived so deeply in it. It was a neighborhood I lived in. I saw it with my neighbors. It was a part of my life. But you know, the generations who lived through the civil rights fights in America, and there were many of them, right? Same thing. They pushed back against the hate and made America better. Nobody sat around and waited for the hate to go away. That never does anything. They stood up and they said, no, you know what? We love each other. We care for each other. We want to build a better country together. And when we do that, we push back against the hate, and ultimately we triumph. We are being tested today as, well, I mean, the Civil War was a test, but this is an unprecedented test, different, and we've never had a president as lawless, as corrupt, as cruel. Never. It's an enormous threat. We've never had his political party bow down and say, yes, sir, whatever you want, we'll change whatever laws. Never. This is an unprecedented challenge. Love your neighbors. And we'll get through it. Talk to you again soon. In the meantime, get out there and fight. Hang in there. Take care.